Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It is January 17th, 2022. I hope that I don't flub that up. And we are super excited for today's episode. Today we have in the house not only a longtime listener, as in several years of Mormon Stories podcast, but also someone who I consider to be a dear friend. And that friend is Dr. Randy Bell. Hey, Randy Bell.
Dr. John DeLynn, nice to see you.
Yeah.
And Kara, you too.
And Kara's in the house.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us, Kara.
Yeah.
How you been?
So good.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's been a really fun weekend.
Yeah. Well, we've got something really, I think, enjoyable for you guys. So always I try and just interview people on Mormon Stories. We do the long form interviews where we try and interview people that have compelling Mormon stories. And I think Randy's story definitely fits that. Randy's a Southern California boy, or at least that's in his adult life. That's where he's from. We'll hear more about that. But Randy will have his own Mormon story. He has had a really interesting career that has taken him to a lot of places that people will be familiar with, and they'll be probably impressed or curious about some of his professional experiences, and we'll get into that as well. I think the main hook for today's interview has to do with Randy's conversion from Mormonism to what I think Randy would describe as Christianity. And I'm going to just say at the outset, Mormons take offense at the idea that they're not considered by many to be Christian. That's not the intent of today's title. I grew up in Katy, Texas with Southern Baptists all around me accusing, Mormons of not being a Christian. But what we mean by the title from Mormon to Christian is just that instead of going the way many post-Mormons do, probably at least half the post-Mormons that I know end up as self-identifying as either agnostic or atheist, and there's nothing wrong with that. We do have a very high percentage of our listeners who in some ways identify as Christian, and or we have many listeners that are just trying to figure out where they want to land because it's so disorienting to go through a faith crisis in a high demand religion. And we always like to model or provide role models or examples of people all across the spectrum so that literally if secularism is where you want to end up, we've got plenty of role models for that. But if Christianity is somewhere where you're inclined to still hold on to Christianity, to still have Christ be an important part of your life, either literally or symbolically or whatever, metaphorically, we like to have guests on as that as well. And Randy, you identify as Christian today, and I think that Christianity is an important part of your identity. Tell me if I've got that wrong.
Well, I think that it is, and I want to echo your comment that I don't want anybody to feel offended at anything. If anybody lands on Mormonism or Islam or Buddhism or atheism, they have my respect. But yes, I am happily a Christian. That's a loaded word, though, and you think Christian, you have some political views or some position on LGBT. I think as we go along, we'll see that there's a lot of ways to be a Christian, and I found one that works for me.
Yeah, and that will probably, I'm guessing that throughout your Mormon story, you're going to be sprinkling in some insights as it relates to Christianity, maybe your early Christian impulses, and then ultimately your conversion into a different form of Christianity, leaving Mormonism. So we'll sprinkle that in as we go.
Sure.
And just a full disclosure, I have never identified as neither atheist or agnostic. I'm supportive of wherever people end up, and I have a lot of respect for the teachings of Jesus. So that's where I stand. Kara, do you want to up front kind of give your biases, or do you want to avoid that, or where do you stand?
You're the boss. You tell me. I'm really interested because I was just reading over Randy's outline, and it sounds like I respect anyone who puts a lot of thought into the conclusions that they come to. As a Mormon, a lot of the ideas we handed to us from birth. So anyone who goes through like any kind of deconstruction and reconstruction of their belief always has my respect. So I was somebody who was kind of living as a Christian with one foot in a Christian camp, listening to a lot of sermons from like 20 2012, all the way till 2019 when I lost my literal faith in Mormonism, and thought that I was like, oh, yay, I could be a Christian now. But I just deconstructed those beliefs and didn't feel like there was any validity to hold up the beliefs. But that's just me. I'm one person, and I've never walked in somebody else's shoes, so I don't know what's right for them and what makes sense in their brain. But I identify as an agnostic atheist now, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah. And so I think, and by the way, tomorrow we're going to have the amazing Alan Mount on from Marriage on a Tightrope, who does a lot of TikToks around atheism and secularism. And we like the idea of having a kind of a charitable, respectful dialogue between a theist, as in Randy, and an atheist, as in Alan Mount. So we're going to be looking forward to that as well. That's going to be a part 2 or part 3, depending on how today goes. But I like the idea of kind of someone who's more neutral in this camp, and Kara, someone who kind of has put that stake in the ground as atheist or agnostic, to be able to ask questions and to query from kind of multiple perspectives. So I'm really excited that we've got a little bit of some diversity along the spectrum, just to kind of like have questions and insight from various perspectives today.
Yeah, I love diversity. I think you get the best decisions made where you have all parties at the table playing nice and bringing different perspectives to the table. And with a lot of the work I have a very devout atheist who is part of my team on certain things, and they keep me honest. And I like that dynamic.
Yeah. Really quickly, Randy, so that people get a sense for your career, can you just give people a sense for kind of just a couple of the books you've authored, a tiny bit about the work you do, and maybe some of the more interesting or compelling sites you visited, just to let people know how truly cool your profession is, as again a hook to make them kind of want to stay tuned.
Well, I studied disasters, and so you name a disaster, there's a pretty good chance I've worked on it. And I study them as an economist. I measure the economic damages that disasters cause. And I worked on the World Trade Center Flight 93 crash site. I worked on the O.J. Simpson case, John Benet Ramsey, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, Heaven's Gate. That's where I learned about cults, and worked on that case for a couple of years. There's a long list. They might pop up in my head as I go along because they're kind of part of my story. I think one case I worked on was very, very sad, was Sandy Hook. And so I've been to some sites of some pretty serious tragedies, and the Pulse nightclub really resonated with me. I walked in the door as a true believing Mormon into the Pulse nightclub, saw what I saw, and I can't talk about it very long because I get choked up, but I walked out the door very LGBT affirming, which may upset some of my Christian friends, but I really don't care. That's just where I am. So each case brought some flavor to my story, I think.
Yeah, and so that's, Randy's just fascinating to have dinner with, and I've had several brunches and dinners with Randy.
Yeah.
And your work even took you to the properties of Jeffrey Epstein after he had.
They did, yeah. and on that case, I can just say I worked on it. I can't really discuss it much, but yes, I did. Yeah. I've been there. Yeah.
Okay, so again, hopefully you guys got a flavor for the fascinating, insightful, intelligent human that we've got in front of us. So, but as we always begin, we begin with the Mormon story.
Yeah.
So, Randy, where does your Mormon story begin?
Well, I'm in Laguna Beach now, and I started my Mormon story where I started my life in Orange County, California. I was born a tall, white, straight Mormon guy, and I grew up in Fullerton, California. And what made my childhood kind of interesting was our home. My mom's 99. She's still with us, and our childhood home is still there, and she's still there. Overlooks Disneyland. And it was a wonderful Southern California childhood. A lot of days at the beach, a lot of fun. I have a weird memory in a lot of ways, but I have a memory that goes right back to nursery at church. And so I remember growing up Mormon.
So born in the covenant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My dad, the Bell family goes right back to Nauvoo. My great-grandfather is Joseph F. Smith's companion in Hawaii. My grandfather went on a mission to Tahiti. My dad went back to Hawaii, and then we'll get to my mission later on. But sticking with my childhood, my parents, very devout. My mom was Relief Society president or Stake Relief Society president pretty much my whole childhood. My dad was a temple worker, and he's also our Boy Scout leader. My mom's the only member of her family, and I was pretty excited about the fact that my uncle was the director of Gilligan's Island. So that was a lot of fun. I tried to talk him into.
That's a funny sitcom that I'm old enough to have watched growing up and really loved it. And my first, let's just say, romantic awakenings were with Ginger.
Ginger?
Not Marianne. I thought Marianne was super cute.
John, I thought I liked you. I thought you were a Marianne kind of guy.
As a boy, I can't choose my awakenings, but I had an awakening with Ginger.
Well, I talked to my uncle. I swear to you, I was in kindergarten or first grade, and I said, Uncle Jerry, you got to set me up with Marianne. And I meant it.
Well, she was beautiful. Marianne was beautiful.
Yeah. And he says, he was a very funny guy. And he goes, I can set you up with Ginger, but I just don't think it will work out with Marianne. And I slammed my hand on the picnic table. I said, look, Uncle Jerry, I want Marianne. But anyway, it was a fun childhood. I remember primary, because we had our chapel had a big, adult chapel and also had a junior chapel. I don't know if they do that everywhere else, but that's how it was with us. And I remember these stories about Jesus when I was just really little. And I just thought he was so cool. And I was growing up in the 60s. So we had the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and, the whole hippie thing and Woodstock. And they were talking about the Beatitudes and the parables. And I just thought, and I never heard about Joseph Smith till I was about 7. But it was all about Jesus. And I remember a big part of my Mormon story is I was sitting there in primary, maybe 5, I don't know. And they were talking more and more about Jesus, and that's all they talked about. And I leaned over to my little buddy next to me and I said, where do you meet Jesus? I mean, where do I got to meet this guy. And my buddy goes, he looked at me like I was an idiot. And he goes, no, I think he died and went to heaven. And I go, oh, bummer, because I really was anxious to meet him. And so that was a very early childhood memory, but it was just a fun childhood and idyllic in every way. And I think
Did you dig the primary songs?
I loved them. Jesus Loves Me for a Sunbeam. Yeah, we had a crepe paper sun rays that went off from the sun, and I got to hold the sun ray once.
A sunbeam,
a sunbeam. That's about all I got.
Sarah, is this before your time? Do you even know that song at all?
Do you think I'm 5 years old or something? Of course I sang that song. I was kicked out in the hall for singing that song too rambunctiously my entire time.
You can't sing that too rambunciously.
Were you the ones that would pop up in your chair?
Yeah. Yeah. Primary leaders. They're like, Kara, calm the freak down. Get out in the hall.
All right. So you like that song.
So a lot of fun, but
Do you remember when church, you used to have to, wasn't it like on Sundays you'd go twice?
Yeah.
You'd go
3 times.
How was it?
You got up early, went to priesthood meeting, came home and had Cheerios or oatmeal, went back down for Sunday school, came home and had lunch, went down for sacrament meeting, came home and had dinner. No kidding.
That is tedious. I'm old enough to remember that.
I am too. Yeah. It was a big deal. And, but most of my friends were not Mormon. I mean, I grew up in Southern California. So, one of my best friends was Presbyterian. Another one was Catholic. And, we didn't care. I mean, it was just, and everybody went to church of one type or another back then.
Remind me if you had siblings. I don't know.
7 siblings.
What?
Yeah. I'm the second to the youngest.
Massive family.
It's a big family.
8 kids?
7 altogether, including me.
6 siblings.
6 siblings, excuse me.
And where were you in birth order?
I was second to the last. I'm second. I have a little brother. Yeah.
Wow. All biological?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They were busy.
That's old school Mormon, like 7 kids. That's how it was back in the day.
That's how it was. We were in it to win it,
Yeah.
So.
And your dad's profession was?
My dad was a mechanical engineer. He passed away at age 92.
Whoa.
And he worked for Fender guitar. And Leo Fender lived 2 streets away from us.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. So Fender and music, it was a big part of growing up. Our kitchen table was made of Stratocaster cutaway wood that my dad brought back from the plant and made our kitchen table. And Leo was in the neighborhood, very quiet man. And music, it was really funny because we'd play a game at dinner time where we'd quiz my dad, what rock stars he had met. And my dad didn't care. He just literally no autographs, no pictures, no nothing. And I can't tell you how many times we coached it out of him that he had met with, A-list, iconic rock stars, because when they played it.
Give us examples, drop names.
No? Well, like one day, you remember Emerson, Lake and Palmer?
Sure.
Well, he goes, I was with this guy today. His name was Carl. And I go, and they were playing at the Anaheim Stadium. And I said, as in Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Carl Palmer? And he goes, yeah, I spent the day with him. Why did Dad want you to call me? And I said, Dad, what are the rock stars like? I would always quiz him, but he didn't say much. And he didn't know who they were, nor did Leo care, or any of those guys.
Really?
Freddie Travaris, all those iconic Fender guys didn't care.
Wait, Leo Fender didn't care about rock stars?
Well, there's a story where this Prince came in because he had a custom-made purple guitar. The Prince.
Okay.
Oh, anybody of anybody. Yeah. Went through that plant when they played at the Anaheim Stadium or Convention Center. And the guys went in to get Leo to say, hey, Prince is out here. He's got to meet you. He's not going to fly home till, he's picked up his purple guitar. And Leo just said, I'm busy right now, because he was just a designer. He was a mechanical engineer. And the guys kept going back and, hammering on Leo, you got to get out here to meet Prince. And finally, Leo was frustrated, went out there, and Prince said, I just want to say hello, and can you make me a promise you never paint another shade of this purple on another guitar? And Leo goes, yeah, sure, I promise. And he went back in and went back to work. And that's how Leo was. But the Rolling Stones came through. I think Zeppelin did. I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan. Everybody
I won't hold that against you. I'm a Beatles fan, so.
Well, the Beatles came too.
You kind of have to choose. You can't be Beatles and Zeppelin fan. My listeners are going to blow up at me. I'm sure that's not
really
true. I'm just being silly. Growing up as a Mormon kid, I felt like Led Zeppelin didn't have the spirit. I felt like they had a dark. I felt like Led Zeppelin had a dark.
Oh my gosh!
It's probably because I was taught the Stairway to Heaven had backmasking and mentioned
bad
Satan.
Doctrine right there. Led Zeppelin is iconic, and
you felt the Holy Ghost as a Mormon teen listening to Led Zeppelin?
Far more than Paul H. Dunn. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. No, it was. There's others. They all came through. In fact, my dad was. We'd go down to the plant, and I came up to the lady who was assembling the necks to the bodies of the guitar, and it dawned on me that Jimi Hendrix's guitar had been on her table. And I said that. I said, Jimi Hendrix's guitar was right here. And she goes, and she just looked at me and said, everybody's guitar has been on my table.
Fun.
It was there was a reverence for what they were doing.
Nice.
So, yeah, and Boy Scouts was huge. I got the Boy Scout manual, and my parents never had to coach me for a second. Neither one of my brothers earned their eagle or cared about it that much, I don't think. But give me a checklist, and I'm on it. And so I earned the merit badges, and we had a water skiing theme. I mean, we either camping or water skiing every single Saturday. In high school, the music scene was huge because a lot of bands came out of Fullerton and Anaheim. Terry Nunn in Berlin, Social Distortion. Mike Ness lived right down the street. You want me to drop some names?
No, that's fine.
Well, there was a couple more. The Gwen Stefani, there were a lot of people going, a lot of stuff going on, and the Mormon dances were epic. I mean, they hired the best bands, and they were live bands. None of this DJ stuff.
Your Mormon ward and stake dances had live bands?
Huge, every Saturday, and they were the best bands.
Around what years would that have been?
Well, I graduated from high school in 1977, so this is all kind of mid-'70s.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they have dance cards back then?
No, none of that stuff. No, no. And not only that, John, but all the kids from high school came. all the girls from different high schools came. And so it rotated, Fullerton or Yorba Linda, Tustin, Orange, and Anaheim, and it rotated. So every Saturday was an epic, huge band, huge dances, and all the kids from the high school came, whether they were Mormon or not. It was big.
Non-Mormons came.
Oh yeah, by the truckload. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, before I want to ask you questions about like the hippie movement and Woodstock and all that stuff. But before, is there anything else you want to talk about your childhood, kind of your prepubescence kind of years that were important to your Mormon journey?
There's one story in high school, but I can say
before high school. Anything else like with your family or you before like high school?
Not really. No. Just I have very fond memories of my high school. I have wonderful parents.
Did you guys do family home evening or like family scripture study? Like how Mormon-y was your home growing up as a child?
It was pretty darn Mormon-y. We went to church every Sunday without exception. And I did seminary. And we did have family home evening, not necessarily ever. I remember when family home evening became a thing, when they announced it.
You were pre-family home evening.
Oh, yeah. I think I got 10 years on you. So, yeah, I remember that. And so not everybody, it kind of ramped up. It wasn't like there was a period of time where there was no such thing as family home evening.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But a very Mormon-y. What about like coffee and tea and tobacco and alcohol in your home?
At zero, none.
Okay.
My mom's family, as I said, she was the only member. My aunts and uncles would come over and they bring their own Senka or bring their own coffee.
What's Senka? People don't know what Senka is.
Oh, it's like a instant coffee, I think.
Was it decaf?
I think it might have been. I didn't pay much attention. My dad drank Postum.
I drink Postum.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I never.
Postum was like Mormon coffee made of grains.
Yeah.
It was a way for you to have a hot beverage that wasn't caffeinated.
It's wannabe coffee. Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad drank Postum. My parents were devout, but they were pretty. Let's just say I got away with a lot of stuff. We did a lot of pranks, a lot of goofing off, a lot of stuff going on in the neighborhood with toilet papering houses, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
All right. Did you do scout camp?
Yes. Not only I did, I loved it. Some guys weren't into it, but I loved the camping. I loved the merit badges. I loved riding my bike around town to the merit badge counselors, checking off my merit badges. I love water skiing and I love the beach. That was basically my life.
Did you water ski in the ocean or was there a lake?
No. Lake Elsinore or Lake Paris, or we went up to, Lake Powell once a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like, and how did it feel? Was your ward tight knit, your Mormon ward? What was your ward? What was the name of the ward?
Our ward was awesome.
What was the name of it?
Fullerton 3rd Ward.
Okay.
I think it's now called the Acacia Ward.
What stake?
Yorba Linda stake.
Okay.
Or Placentia stake.
Kara, do these city names, do they mean anything to you? I know you spent some time in
They're all like
LA.
OC.
This is OC. Yeah, Kara's Santa Monica, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That came later.
Okay.
Yeah, I made my way over there. But
Orange County, OC is Orange
the
County.
ward, as deacons, every single Sunday we had to open up the back doors and set up more chairs. It was packed. It was just this huge vibe, wonderful people that I still love to this day.
Leaders that really took care of you and loved you?
Yes. Bishop Lowe was awesome. Bishop Black, Bishop Harris. I remember all my bishops. They were just great. They were people that were not only kind, but they were, what's the word? Successful in business. I mean, they were people to look up to at multiple levels. And back then there was no correlation. It was like a fast and testimony meeting was, I don't want to say freak show, but it was fun. Because there were all kinds of crazy ideas, and we'd sit and laugh and this and that. I mean, it was really vibrant. There was none of this kind of corralling of attitude or behavior. It was pretty open, very open.
Was this during the time Donnie and Marie were big? And did you watch the Donnie and Marie show?
Yeah, they came they came on the scene when I was in high school. My dad was really into them, I think. I was more like going out on dates and going out and having fun with my buddies when they were on TV. So I didn't personally watch a lot of it, but it was a big deal. Yeah.
How did your non-Mormon friends view Mormons? Like, were they like, these guys are weird, or were you just totally, it wasn't even a thing?
It wasn't really a thing until high school. Maybe this is a good point to tell this little story. I was in high school, and this tall, blonde, beautiful girl, her name's Lori. She was a homecoming queen. She was the kind of person that, if she said hi to you, you felt great all day. And she comes running across the quad and comes up, running up to me, Randy. I go, hey, hi, Lori. And she had this like paper bag full of books. And Lori was a born again Christian, and I think she still is. And she says, Randy, I got these books, and you got to read these. Please read these. And I go, okay. And I never got the memo about anti-Mormon literature. The attitude back then was more like, whatever, Mormonism was about learning truth from wherever it came from. That was kind of the theme. And Lori gave me these books. I went home and I opened up the first book, first chapter, and it's the first sentence said Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And I said, no, he wasn't. That was Brigham Young. And my mom was in the kitchen. I said, Mom, was Joseph Smith a polygamist? She goes, oh, heavens, no. Where'd you get that idea? And she goes, that was Brigham Young. And he kind of went off the rails, and the church got back on. And, that was kind of her explanation. And so I believe my mom, but we had a big set of books on the bookshelf. And I took a big black volumes of history of the church, and I pulled them out, and I made sure that they were published by the church. I was doing my due diligence, and I pull out the index, and I look up polygamy and Joseph Smith, and I go right to this phrase that said where Joseph Smith was accused of being a polygamist, and he says, what a thing for a man to be accused of having 7 wives when I can only find one. And I looked at the dates. It was right before he died. And so there I had conclusive proof, because Joseph Smith said so in a book published by the church, that Joseph Smith was not a polygamist. So I took the book, I put them all back in the bags. I read a little bit more, and I went back to Lori and I said, Lori, look, you're so cool, but why does your pastor tell these lies about my church? Can't we just kind of get along here? This isn't cool. And Lori is a really kind-hearted person. She kind of looked sad that I was kind of like, railing on her a little bit, or at her church. And I gave the books back, and that concept stuck, was firmly implanted in my psyche for decades longer.
So you weren't taught a lot of we'll get to what you learned after your faith crisis.
Yeah.
But you're saying there's a lot truthful, factual things about Mormon church history that you weren't taught growing up.
Absolutely not. And even if you explicitly asked or looked it up, I didn't know. And I went to seminary 4 years.
So without telling the actual factual history, what were the things that you were taught that you've now discovered weren't true? So without giving the ending away, list all the things you were taught that now, as a Mormon child growing up in California, that now aren't factual or true. Can you do that? That's kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, let me back up if I can to primary, because that can kind of lead into that. I remember when I was 7, I was just about to be baptized, when you turn 8. And I remember my teacher, Sister Thatcher, sitting us all down in a classroom, and she pulls out kind of a flip chart, with laminated pages, and she starts telling, and I had never heard the name Joseph Smith before in my life, and I'm 7.5 years old. And she goes, and she tells the first vision story. And I distinctly remember going, oh my gosh, this just feels sketchy. And I'm a little innocent kid, so there's no agenda. But I just, and this.
What about it seems sketchy?
It just, I don't know how to explain it. It just seemed like, it didn't sit well with me. And I can't explain it beyond that. It was just this profound feeling that came over me. And of course I buried that feeling. But, of course you were told about the first vision and that there was God the Father and Jesus Christ there. That's what I was taught. And there was only one version that I ever heard. The Book of Abraham was translated from papyrus. The golden plates were literal, that Joseph Smith sat at a table. Sometimes there was a curtain, sometimes there was not, but he was sitting there looking through stones or something to translate the actual physical golden plates.
One wife, Emma.
That was crystal clear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
crystal clear.
And what about what were you taught about the circumstances around his death, Joseph's death?
Oh, well, that he was being continuously hounded and persecuted for just simply the restoration. That's all you knew. And that he was tarred and feathered for no apparent reason. Just the narrative was very clear on all that.
What about Joseph Smith and the Word of Wisdom?
Well, that he was, what I recall, being taught several times that he had a problem with his leg and had surgery, and that he was offered whiskey or something, and he refused to have the whiskey when he had his leg operated on.
Giving you the impression that what?
Well, that Joseph Smith never drank alcohol at all,
right.
Even though the Word of Wisdom hadn't been revealed at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was. There was no nuance. It was all crystal clear.
What were you taught about evolution and the age of the earth?
Well, evolution was a big thing that we would debate. And, it wasn't, Mormons didn't have a monopoly on claiming that evolution didn't happen. It was my Protestant friends and Catholic friends. It was kind of like evolution was talked about, but usually in the context of trying to rebut it from various religious perspectives, not just Mormon.
But what were you taught in the Mormon church about, let's just say, the age of the earth?
Well, I remember being taught explicitly the world was 7,000 years old. Frankly, I never believed that. And it just seemed...
you were taught it.
I was taught that.
What about Noah and the ark and the flood?
Oh, yeah, quite literal.
What?
Literal flood. And I remember going to my bishop once because it seemed tough to believe that Mount Everest at whatever it is, 24,000 feet, the sea levels rose to that level. And I asked my bishop about that. And he said, and he was a doctor, bright guy. And he says, oh, no, that could have happened. And he was a doctor. I'm a little kid. And I said, okay, all right. I didn't quite get it, but that's what he said.
And Adam and Eve were the first humans, basically.
Yeah, no question about that. Yeah. Adam and Eve were the first humans, and God took a rib from Adam's side and made Eve.
No death before the fall of Adam and Eve.
Right. Yeah. All of that was standard,
okay. Right.
Standard lessons. Yeah.
So just as a side note, I did a survey of all my Mormon Stories listeners just a couple of days ago.
Oh,
we have half of our viewers on YouTube have never been Mormon. Half.
Wow.
It's the largest. Like I asked, what percentage of you are active believing Mormons? What percentage of you are inactive Mormons? What percentage of you are ex-Mormons? What percentage of you have never been Mormon? The largest single group of our YouTube viewers have never been Mormon.
Yeah.
So I'm going into some of this detail for the benefit of my majority non-Mormon audience.
Well, but to be fair, it wasn't just Mormons. My Methodist friends believe the same thing. The kids that didn't go to church, pretty much, there wasn't a lot of controversy in society at large, over these issues.
Right.
So, and I look at it from I didn't grow up in Utah at all. So I had a very diverse friendship base, and it was widespread.
Yeah.
These kind of beliefs. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what do you want to tell about your high school years? We always talk about Word of Wisdom stuff, Law of Chastity stuff, shame spiral stuff. And also we like to talk about kind of faith development, testimony development, or any other big events in your life. So take it away.
I kind of, in a lot of ways, I think my story's kind of boring.
Okay,
because
that's fine.
I was a pretty good kid. You
weren't experimenting.
No, I was a pretty good kid. I had some girls. There were some girls in high school that explicitly told me they wanted to have sex, and I was like just unthinkable, not going to happen. So I was a good kid.
What about like beer, or alcohol, or weed? Like, I was going to say that like mid-70s. You graduated from high school what year?
77. Yeah.
Okay, so you're literally 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
So like, early 70s is Woodstock, and then mid 70s it's Eagles, it's Fleetwood Mac, it's James Taylor, it's Elton John,
And don't forget Peter Frampton.
Peter Frampton, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin.
Yeah.
You would remember when they would have died.
Oh yeah, completely. Elvis was a huge thing. I remember when he died. I worked at a music store on Chapman Avenue. So my job was to listen to music and be familiar. So when customers came in, all of the music was a huge thing. And it was amplified, no pun intended, by the fact that, Fender was in the neighborhood. So that was huge. And that was a great part of growing up. And it was really weird because, I'd be playing like Kiss or, pick a band. And while I'm washing the cars, my dad would come out and say, turn that noise off. And I go, Dad, they're playing a Fender, so there's always kind of this fun banter going on, but it was a big thing. So
your top 5 favorite rock and roll bands were?
Well, number one easily is Led Zeppelin.
I'm gonna not hold that against.
Yeah, I know, but we're still gonna get along. We're gonna find common ground here in a second. I loved Aerosmith. There's so many. David Bowie was epic. Rolling Stones, epic. That's just 4. I'll think of the 5th one in a minute. But
not Eagles? I mean, Eagles is that classic
that
Southern
was a
California
little
band.
too soft for me. I like the hard rock. I like to rock it, man.
Rush? We got to mention Rush.
Yeah, I like Rush. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I got to ask, did you like Queen?
Loved Queen. That would probably be should be in my top 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, Lex de Azevedo wrote a book called Pop Music and Morality. Now this is in the 80s, but at some point in my, early-ish high school years, there was all this talk about like the Beatles backmasking stuff and Queen putting marijuana into the backmask. You'd put on these LP albums that were made of vinyl, and you could use your finger and make them go backwards. And you were told that, maybe Stairway to Heaven would say, "Here's to my sweet Satan," if you played it backwards. And the Beatles started, I think, this backmasking kind of trend.
Right.
But like Queen and Led Zeppelin and a lot of these bands, I was taught that were evil as a Mormon kid because they talked about Satan, they love Satan, they worship Satan, blah, blah, blah. Did any of that come into your Mormon high school years of like, stay away from these rock bands, they're satanic?
A little bit, but not really. Yeah, fortunately that came after I enjoyed my high school years.
Nice.
You heard that stuff. I remember more with the Beatles. You play that backwards. John is dead or something like that.
Paul is dead.
Paul is, some one of them. But yeah, and we did it on our, back then you really had vinyl records, and we did it at home, and we kind of heard it. But you take our podcast and play it backwards, you're going to hear something.
If you play Mormon Stories backwards, it says John is dead. I put that in there.
Yeah. So. I didn't. That was just kind of a goofy kind of conspiracy theory in my mind, at least.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. So you didn't even try weed, or I guess I'm putting you on the spot.
No. I was a good kid, and when I went to my
a good kid. All my audience is like all the Gen Zers are rolling their eyes.
I know. What can I say? But
Kara, did you hear that? Good kid, Kara? Did you hear that?
I actually don't even know what you mean. It sounds like he was a good kid.
Well,
a Boy Scout.
I was a Mother Teresa, and I did sneak out a lot out of my bedroom in the middle of the night and do pranks with my friends. And I did have a couple visits with the Fullerton Police Department.
Ooh.
Yeah. I mean, we did some stupid things.
Pranks.
They were pranks, but other people didn't find them amusing.
Was toilet papering a Mormon thing, or was that what all
That
kids
was
did?
a universal.
Back in the day, Kara, was toilet papering a thing when you were growing up?
Only the bad kids, not me.
Oh,
You wouldn't
I
have
was
done
watching
that.
Princess Bride in like a clubhouse with all my girlfriends. Like, we were good. We were good kids.
When
Proto
I was
girls.
growing up, if there was a girl you thought was cute and you went to a stake dance and you wanted to like send her the signal that you really liked her, you and your buddies would go toilet paper her house.
oh, absolutely.
And throw, get the toilet paper rolls, throw them over the high trees.
Yeah.
And she'd wake up in the morning and it's a little bit of a pain and her parents wouldn't love it. But that was just what you did. And it was kind of, you'd smile and you'd laugh and it would be like, yeah, that's what you did to kind of show someone
You were
affection.
one of those guys.
That was very Mormon
We
growing up.
did that, and we did some egging kind of things. There's some things I'm simply not going to tell publicly we did that were pretty. I'd kill my kids if they did them. But overall, I made it through unscathed.
Okay.
Pretty well.
What about like ever like awkward bishops interviews where he's asking you about,
Well, there was one, I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. I was 11 and a half, getting ready to become a deacon. And the bishop asked me if I masturbated. And I said no, because I had no idea what he's talking about. I honestly didn't.
you hadn't learned the word yet.
I didn't even know the word. I didn't know what and so I went.
You hadn't watched Gilligan's Island yet.
Apparently, I missed that episode. So the next Monday or whatever it was, I go to school and I'm sitting around the table and I didn't know what I was asking. And I said to my group of buddies, I said, does anybody know what masturbate means? And they're all looking at each other like, no. And this one goes, oh yeah, I know. And we were like really curious, what? And he goes, that's where you play with your diddly. And I go, it's like, why would anybody do that? It just sounded absurd. But thanks, to that bishop, I learned about what it was. But my bishops were cool, and I got to. And I graduated from high school in 18, and then you don't go on a mission until you're 19. And I landed on those interviews, and my interview was over in about 7 minutes.
You were the good boy.
I wasn't John DeLynn, but I was a pretty good kid.
What did you have interests in high school, and how did you envision your profession or your career being as you were graduating from high school? Did you have a sense for what you wanted to do or be? Did you have hobbies that you were really into that really defined you?
Well, my hobbies, I don't think I could really monetize. I mean, it was a lot of water skiing and going to the beach, so.
Surfing? What about surfing?
I was more a body surfer. I was really good at water skiing, and I had really great balance, and I could cut and hit my elbow in the water and all that. But surfing, I tried several times. I just never got it.
Okay.
But that's probably because I probably spent more time water skiing. But anyway.
Were you academic?
I was the kind of kid that never ever studied and got B pluses. So I don't know if that's academic. I got by in high school.
Okay.
Not at that time in my life, I was not that interested in, sitting down with a book.
Okay.
It was more about having fun.
All right.
Crazy fun.
So back then, most Mormon kids tried to get into BYU their freshman year, if they were men, before they would go on a mission. What were you thinking about graduating?
BYU at that point in my life, I had no interest in. BYU back then, quite honestly, if you could fog a mirror, you could get into BYU. I mean, it was really easy to get into BYU. Today it's a different deal, but back then, that's the way it was. No, I went to Cal State for a year before my mission.
Which one?
Cal State Fullerton.
Okay.
Where I'm from. And it was right across the street from my high school. So I literally, just walked another block and I'm there at Cal State. So I went there. My bishop's interview was, like a couple minutes, because I knew I was friends with his son. He already knew all my, visits with the police and everything. And, there's not a lot to say. And then I think you'll get a kick out of this, but I went to the stake president and he was this guy that was tall and had big white hair and very, well, I don't know the word. I don't know the word, but a real air about him. And he sat down in this big leather chair, and it looked like he was there to sit and talk to me for the whole evening, the whole night. And he goes, yeah, after the pleasantries and hi, how you doing, and all that. He goes, well, let's talk about your sins. And I go, well, I already kind of went over that with the bishop, and he seemed like, well, you need to go over them with me. And it's like, okay. So I went through my 2 or 3 minutes of little things I had done. And he goes, okay, and what else? And I go, that's it. And he goes, there's got to be more. I go, no, that's about it. He goes, everybody has more than that. And I literally said to him, I said, I can make stuff up, but that's all I got, dude. So that's it. And he just looked defeated. He just wanted to relish in a long night of graveling and sin. And there just wasn't much to talk about, because everybody knew me that I was a screw off. I like to, pull pranks and do this and do that. I was always sneaking out. But as far as, the evil's weed, the devil's weed or anything, that's just not where I went. So,
okay.
And he kind of goes, okay, you're good to go.
All right. So I guess you did serve a mission. Anything you want to say about your mission?
Well, yeah, because I'll tell you how I knew the church was true. I got a letter in the mail, and I opened it up, and it was to Birmingham, England, where Led Zeppelin's from. So I was ecstatic to go to England, and England I fell in love with the place. I just to this day I love England, and wonderful people. I love it. I was happy as a clam there.
Was it hard to have baptismal success in Birmingham?
Well, we had a motto that for every door we knocked on, they baptized someone in South America, and for every baptism they had there, we knocked on a door. We had success, but it wasn't anything like what was going off in Mexico and South America, that kind of thing.
So, like your whole mission, do you even have a number for how many people?
Well, I do, but I don't know what I want to share. I personally had relative to England, had a lot of success.
Okay. Were you aware of the baseball baptism scandals that had happened 10 years prior?
Yeah.
Or 10 or 20 years prior? And was there cleanup, or were there rumors about that you heard of?
Yeah, there was a lot of cleanup. I served part of my mission in the mission office, and part of my job was going through records, and we would go and knock on people's door and say, you're listed as a member. Did you want to be a member? And they'd say, I have a vague recollection of that kind of, discussion. And we would, honor their wishes to remove their names or whatever that looked like.
And yeah.
Yeah, so it happened.
They would have joined because the church was creating baseball leagues in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And they would have had baptism as being a requirement to play in the baseball leagues. And that's how they would have been baptized, right?
Unfortunately, that's all true. Yeah. And it obviously embarrassing for, as a missionary to realize that had happened before. We were more on the cleanup side of things at that point, but no question it happened.
Okay. So any other stuff from your mission that you want to talk about, or?
Not really. I had 2 great mission presidents. They were very kind. I liked them both. It was a good experience.
So by the time you left your mission, what if you were given 30 seconds to bear your testimony, what would you have said?
Well, before I do that one thought does come up, because in England, you would hear almost on a daily basis, the topic of polygamy. And it was almost every person you talked to. And we would have to say, no, we didn't practice polygamy. And no, Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy. And yeah, Brigham Young did briefly for these reasons. And then the church, dismissed that as a practice, while going. And that was a daily thing. And occasionally, people in England are profoundly polite, and met only 2 or 3 rude people the entire time. And so that was. Oh, occasionally you'd meet somebody who was a little more turned up, that, a little wound, a little tighter, who would say, well, you used to come to England, you meaning the Mormon missionaries, and, tell lies and take our daughters and take our sisters off to Utah. And they were pretty bent, pretty upset about it. And of course we would deny that, that we weren't doing that. That's what we thought was true.
Oh yeah. Because Joseph Smith had sent missionaries to England, and for some reason, a lot of teenage girls ended up coming to, Kirtland or Nauvoo.
Yeah.
Almost in a trafficking kind of way, it seems. And so that might have, and I guess the church was denying that there was any polygamy going on in the 1840s and 50s while there was polygamy going on. And that might have been problematic for the UK folk.
It was very problematic, and we were telling people what we had been taught, that didn't happen, that those were anti-Mormon lies, and that, we were, just there to take their truth and add to it kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So if you were given 30 seconds to bear your testimony at the end of your mission, what would that testimony have sounded like?
Well, it would sound like, I know that God lives. I know Jesus is the Christ, and that Joseph Smith is the prophet of the restoration, and the Book of Mormon came forth on gold plates as a second witness that Jesus visited America, and we have true apostles and prophets today. That would be basically the message.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So where did you go after your mission?
Well, I came home and wasn't sure what I was going to do. I'll never forget when we broke through the clouds, because I hadn't seen the sun in England for months. And then I'm back in Southern California, and a buddy of mine came over and he says, hey, we're going up to BYU and you can get in, you can fog a mirror, and you're a return missionary, 100% you're in. And we got a bedroom for you at a house up there, come on up. And I looked at my parents and they go, I don't know, whatever, get out of here, So very quickly, I unexpectedly found myself up at BYU, and got up there, had a lot of fun. The social life was great. I was getting a little more academic at this time. Believe it or not, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I applied for a job to teach at the MTC, and I got the job, which was surprising. And it
wasn't the LTM at that point?
No, it was the MTC at that point. Okay. And they had billed it, because when I went on a mission, you met in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And we were warned about Sandra Tanner. I remember that she might be outside handing out pamphlets. So we were scared to death of Sandra Tanner. But no, when we got back, it was the MTC. And but I was recruited into this special division of 7 teachers who were doing pilots of. Do you remember the rainbow discussions? Mm-mm. Oh, well, that's where every discussion had a different color of paper, and you memorize them, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Brown, and you got kudos as a missionary for literally memorizing. And it wasn't always a natural way of speaking, so it was kind of an awkward memorization. And they were trying to take those discussions that I went on a mission with and translate them into a conversational bullet point tone thing. And so I was teaching the MTC, and the rooms that I taught in had one-way or two-way mirror, where people could be in a room behind there and observe the classes. So I taught the class, and everything was going great, and I was kind of liking it. In fact, I was kind of thinking at that time, I really love the church. I think I could really get into this. I mean, I think I could really, get in, become a seminary teacher. I was really kind of thinking about that avenue, because I didn't know what I wanted to do career-wise. And I finished the lesson this day, and I went out in the hall, and this guy comes charging up to me, who was on the staff overseeing these new lessons that were being developed, and he was livid. I mean, you could his blood pressure was through the roof. And he goes, "Who are you, Elder Bell, to explain away God's miracles?" Because I had taught in the class, I should mention, the story I'd read in the paper about when Noah crossed the Red Sea and an avalanche, scientists had discovered an avalanche that parted the sea temporarily or something. I explained this in the class, and he was all bent that I had shared this in the class. I said, I'm not explaining away God's miracles. I'm saying God has miracles, and maybe this is the way it was done. That's all. And his blood pressure went down, but he was so mad. And that really shocked me.
Is that because you're using science to try and explain a miracle that had been taught as kind of God's intervention kind of thing?
Yeah. And it wasn't to explain away God. That was never my intent. It was more an article supporting that God had created this miracle, but this is maybe the mechanics of how he did it. More of that avenue. But the more I was at the MTC, the more I just got this vibe of high blood pressure. I don't know how to put it other than that. And I decided that just wasn't for me. I was, that was where I attributed it, and I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but I kind of more Utah Mormonism as opposed to California, which is a little more like how I grew up.
Got it.
So when you said that you were like really into this whole Mormon thing and feeling like you were like really vibing and connecting and could potentially be a teacher, were you liking all aspects of Mormonism? Did you like the temple? Sometimes people have like holdouts. How did you feel about the temple?
Yeah. Kara, the thing is, I kind of skipped over the temple, didn't I? The first time I went to the temple, honestly, I was in shock. Yeah. There's no way to put it otherwise. And I looked at my dad on the way.
What parts were shocking unless you're not comfortable sharing?
I want to respect the fact that that's sacred to a lot of my family and friends, okay. But I just will say I was in shock. And, but on the way, I went to the LA temple, and on the way out, I'll never forget, we went out the doors there, and I looked at my dad. I think he just saw that I was in shock. And he says, don't worry, you keep going back, and it gets, you start understanding the symbolism. And I kind of took his word at that. So I kind of had shelved that one, Kara. But it's as far as, I remember at BYU, I was taking a speed reading class at the same time I was taking a religion class. And I remember speed reading these big, thick manuals and noticing contradictions where somebody would say one thing on page 124 and on page 687, somebody else would be saying something quite opposite. I kind of started noticing that, but I wasn't paying attention to it. And, I was still just kind of in it to win it, gung-ho. I grew up, I forgot to mention, Paul H. Dunn was a big deal. You never felt the spirit stronger than when Paul H. Dunn gave his talks. And I was still kind of in that mindset where I was just kind of, happy with it all.
Was Bruce R. McConkie Mormonism or Joseph Fielding Smith Mormonism, was it really at its stride at that point? I know by the time I was in the mid-'80s, it was all about Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith and Doctrines of Salvation, a very literalistic, very almost fundamentalist type Mormonism. Was that catching hold in the late 70s?
Yeah. Mormon Doctrine came out when I was in high school. And I had a copy that I preferred to read that than anything else because it was just kind of in bite-sized pieces, and it was like cutting through everything, giving you the answer. I know that I was always very uncomfortable with the blacks and the priesthood issue. That never resonated at all.
Well, for non-Mormons, what do you mean by that?
Well, when I was growing up in 1979, I believe that changed.
78, yeah.
78, excuse me, yeah. I was on my mission, and
before that,
but back in high school, the blacks and the priest thing really bothered me.
Explain what that is for non-Mormons.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. The blacks couldn't receive the priesthood, meaning they couldn't go to the temple, which is the pinnacle of Mormon worship. You couldn't be sealed in the temple, meaning your black families could not be sealed and be in heaven together.
Or even that endowment ceremony that you just described.
Yeah.
If you had black friends who, for some bizarre reason, would either investigate Mormonism or join, they wouldn't be able to go be missionaries or go through the temple. Is that right?
Right. And, I grew up in a very predominantly white neighborhood. So on a practical who my friends were basis, that wasn't an issue. But as a policy or as a concept, felt very uncomfortable with it. My dad, when the LA riots broke out, my dad said, Randy.
Watts riots kind of?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. We went through, my dad took me to Watts, and I saw the smoldering buildings. I saw the families that had no place to live out on the streets. It was profoundly disturbing. And I just thought, how could anybody pick on a marginalized segment of society and add to their misery? We should be helping these people. That was always my feeling on that topic. And I never liked that. And why on earth I went along to get along with that kind of thing, I look back and I don't have a good answer other than I don't have a good answer.
Well, it's kind of like you said with the temple ceremony. I don't think I've ever met a person who went through the temple and thought it was amazing. They all thought it was creepy, weird, or violent, or barbaric. But there's always the faithful Mormon family member or leader that says, "Hey, don't worry about it. You'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, you'll accustom to this." And the blacks and the priesthood thing would have been similar. It's like, hey, all in due time, God will help you understand why these things happened.
Yeah, that's all true, John. The only thing I'd add is to be fair to the church. The racial prejudice. I woke up reading the LA Times every morning, and I would be horrified at what I read was going on in, at places like Alabama and Louisiana and the Deep South and all of that. That was alive and well. And the whole segregated, drinking fountains, that was in society. I'm not saying it was right. It was wrong. But it wasn't as if society had grown up and the Mormon church was lagging behind at that point in time. It was a societal problem, and Mormons were included.
Yeah, except that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was 14 years before Mormon church. I mean, it's kind of fair to say the Mormon church was like 10 years later than everybody else.
No question with the lagging, but I'm just going right back to the 60s, when I was, when a lot the Watts riot kind of was going on.
Got it.
But I think what you're saying is fair. Yeah.
Do you remember when the 1978 priesthood revelation came through and how you felt?
Not only do I remember, I was on my mission. And we had been out tracting, and we knocked on the door, and this young lady who was black answered the door, and she seemed very sweet and very kind. She had a child, a young son. And she says, "I'm really busy right now, but you can come back." And I kept telling I was a junior companion. I'd just gone on my mission. And I kept saying, "We should go back and see that lady. She asked us to come back." And he kept saying, no. And he just kind of brushed me off. He was a senior companion, so what was I to do? And as soon as he got transferred, I got a new companion. My first appointment was to go back and knock on her door. And we knocked on the door, and I said, "Hi, you told us to come back." And she says, "Oh, yeah, come on in." We taught her, and I baptized her. I got choked up because it was a big moment to realize that this garbage was behind us, from a Mormon perspective. And that's I really remember it because of that.
And I'm guessing that Mormon missionaries prior to 1978 would not have wanted to teach black families why? Because they would have had to have that awkward conversation.
The very awkward conversation. And it was an ugly time in that category, yeah.
About why they can join, but they can't participate in full fellowship. That would have been awkward.
Awkward's the politest way to, as RFM would say, that's the most charitable way to put it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did the BYU thing. You did the MTC teacher thing.
Yeah. I graduated from the Y. I moved to, I didn't get married at that point. I moved to Silicon Valley and, did some high tech stuff and then changed careers. I wasn't sure what I was doing with my career.
That was kind of Hewlett Packard days. That Apple maybe and Microsoft weren't quite on the scene.
Apple had just come out with their Apple and Apple II and Apple II Plus. I remember all those. Your buddy Bill Gates was just starting out. It was everything was going off like a rocket in Silicon Valley. And it was too much. My personality is a little more real estate, damage economics is where I ended up. And real estate suited me better because it's a little more stable and I can wrap my head around it. So I moved to Southern California and got married. And
how old were you when you got married?
I was, I think, about 30. I was kind of late.
Wow.
Yeah. So
were there ever parts where you kind of went astray? Because that's a long time to wait. If you're obeying the law of chastity, 30 is there's a movie about. No, it's a 40 year actually.
Well, it's no secret. When I was in Southern California, I knew Sean McCraney when he was an elders quorum president, because there was a period before that where I was actually engaged to Sean's sister. And I love the McCraney family. In fact, I learned about Rick Warren from I called her Sister McCraney, who sadly just passed away. So it wasn't like I wasn't doing anything, but yeah, there was that. And then I got married when I was about 30. Yeah.
So wait, are you saying you kind of strayed or you didn't stray?
Oh, I didn't stray too bad.
No?
I was pretty good guy.
That's a long time to wait.
Got married in the temple.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you got married at 30.
Had 4 kids.
That's late. Brigham Young's got that famous quote about you're a menace to society if you're a Mormon man and you're not married by what age?
I forget, but I think I broke that rule along with a few others.
Was there like a singles scene in Southern California for single Mormons?
Well, yeah, Huntington Beach had, Sean's family's from Huntington Beach. I was down there a lot. They had a singles ward.
Heather Gay talked about this, that like Huntington Beach and then the DC wards in Washington, there's like 2 wards where like all the children of wealthy families that wanted to meet other prominent wealthy Mormons but weren't married by the time they left BYU, they would either go to Huntington Beach or Washington, DC.
Well, I wasn't wealthy, but I still snuck in there, I guess.
But those wards I'm just saying those wards are kind of famous. Those single wards, apparently, are kind of famous.
I think you're right. And yeah, a lot of the Huntington Beach ward was packed. There were a lot of people there.
Singles ward.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, that's a quote from the Singles Ward and not actually attributed to Brigham Young.
What is? Oh, really?
About being a menace to society. Jan Reese, I just looked it up.
Oh, it was Brigham Young actually never said that?
Yeah, she said he'd never said that. It's just a quote that goes around that was quoted in
Look at you fact-checking, Cara Burrell.
Nice work. Man.
All right, so you get married at 30.
Yeah.
In the LA Temple.
In the LA Temple.
And you're going to live the Mormon dream. Let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
At this point in your life, you're 30. What did Jesus mean to you? Was it just Mormon Jesus? Did you feel like you had a personal relationship with Jesus? Was it just standard vanilla? Do you feel like you had no relationship with Jesus, but you said you believed in Jesus? Is there anything you want to say about your Jesuslyhood, at this part in your life? Because obviously Jesus becomes really important later.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because I always preferred reading the New Testament over anything else. And when I was a kid, you never mentioned the Book of Mormon without mentioning the Bible. It never happened. And somewhere along the line, it morphed to where you go to sacrament meeting and fast and testimony meeting, and people would get up out of the congregation and bear their testimonies. They would just mention the Book of Mormon only.
That was Ezra Taft Benson. He's the one that just flipped and said it's all about the Book of Mormon. That would have been in the mid to late 80s.
Okay. Well, I missed that memo, but I knew something happened, but prior to that, it was always the Bible and the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And I preferred the New Testament.
Yeah.
If I was going to read scriptures, that's what I liked.
You were a Jesus Mormon.
Yeah. Yeah, I was.
My dad was a Jesus Mormon. He said, I'm not big on the Book of Mormon, but that New Testament, I'm down with that.
I love the Book of Mormon insofar as I love the idea of Jesus going to the Americas.
Yeah.
But there was really not much that Jesus said there that he didn't say in the New Testament. So I just preferred to read the New Testament.
Pretty much everything Jesus said was literally copied from the New Testament in the Book of Mormon. Ironically, somehow Jesus pretty much speaks verbatim in the Book of Mormon what he said.
That's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, but I always did that. And then Sean McCraney's mom, Sister McCraney, she was a true believing Mormon, but she would always supplement her, as you say, Jesushood with Rick Warren. And I never heard of Rick Warren before.
For those who don't know, who's Rick Warren?
Rick Warren is the pastor of Saddleback Church, and it's
in Orange County, right?
Orange County.
There's like the mega church, is it not?
It's gigantic.
Yeah.
It is really gigantic.
Yeah.
And he's incredibly charismatic but she would have these cassette tapes of Rick Warren. And I thought that was kind of interesting that she was a devout Mormon, but she wasn't getting enough Jesus there. So she listened to Rick Warren to get that.
That's what I did.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Wait,
I mean, not Rick Warren, but I had other pastors. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I was only listening to sermons from 2011 till 2019. If I was doing anything spiritual, it was not listening to like general conference. It was listening to a sermon that I liked.
That's fascinating.
Because I wanted that vitamin G. I wanted the grace. I wanted like the Jesus loves me gospel. you know?
Yeah.
Randy, did you know Kara was like super Jesused up? Like her
I
last
know
8
that,
years
and I got to listen to you. I listened to your episode, Kara. I got to listen to it again because that's fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this part of it. I just am curious where you went with this. So
Yeah, well, we're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Rick Warren's getting sprinkled into your Mormonism.
Yeah, and I really liked Rick Warren. At first, I get afraid, because how those Christians can be, but that's where I learned about it from Sean McCraney's mom.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I'm living in Orange County, have a house, and having a family. Had 4 kids, and I was the what do you call it? The finance clerk.
What ward and stake would you have been raising your family in?
I was in the Laguna Niguel stake, Laguna Niguel ward.
Okay.
I think is what it was called.
Okay.
And I was quite happy. I was the finance clerk. Then I was in Young Men's, and they one day I got a phone call, and they said, "Hey, Brother Bell, can we come over to your house?" I said, "Sure, come on over." And like 7 people came over. It's like this entourage, and they said, "We've prayed about it, and we want to call you to be a seminary teacher." And I knew the whole thing about never turning down a calling, so I said, well, the answer is yes, but before you accept my yes, let me get my calendar. I went in my home office and I grabbed my calendar and I brought it in and I said, okay, on this day I am in Cincinnati. On this day I'm in wherever, Atlanta. And I went through my travel thing and I said, so in a typical month, I'm always here religiously for Saturday and Sunday. But Monday through Friday, chances are good I'm flying somewhere. Because at this point, I would started getting into real estate damage economics. And they looked at my calendar and they said, well, we're going to, what do you call it, retract our invitation for you to teach seminary. But I was kind of on that track. But I was happy as a clam. And then we moved from there to Coto de Caza. That was Rancho Santa Margarita stake. The same kind of thing. I love the church. I was quite content there.
Were you like hoping to someday be a bishop? Were you wanting to kind of advance in the ranks of the church? Were you doing family meeting and scripture study with your kids? Were you in it to win it? Orthodox Mormon as a dad?
I was kind of like my parents. We went to church every Sunday. As far as the bishop thing, I was really fulfilled with my career as far as, whatever you want to call that kind of fulfillment. I haven't really touched on this, but I had both really, really good bishops and stake presidents, and I've had really, really bad bishops and stake presidents. And I always kind of wrote that off to, I guess when you become a bishop or stake president, you get an extra dose of temptation, and I didn't want that. That's how I explained the fact that one of my stake presidents went to prison, and one of them was caught having an affair, and one of them told blatant lies. I mean, but so the Mormon leadership thing wasn't really where I was driving. I was quite content just being a good rank and file member. Because someone had told me along the line that if you're a good rank and file member, you live right next door to the prophet in heaven, or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, great. I'll kind of go with the career I like and not worry about it.
So not a super fundamentalist kind of Mormon, a little bit more relaxed, but still devout.
I was more relaxed, devout. I was the guy that I always had a Book of Mormon in my briefcase when I was on a plane, and I would I'd talk to people next to me and tell them about it. I tried not to be obnoxious. Others can judge whether I succeeded or not, but yeah, I was devout. I was kind of like I say, I was like my parents.
Okay. Really quickly, you ended up going to grad school at UCLA.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that and and then we can kind of flow into your career if you want.
Sure. Well, grad school was great. I had always loved John Wooden.
He's the basketball coach, famous basketball coach at UCLA.
Yeah.
That would have coached Bill Walton and Kareem, I guess, or maybe not.
Yeah, he coached everyone. He won 10 national titles. I don't think that's ever been. I don't think even Coach K has beat that. Mm-hmm. I grew up, as I say, reading the LA Times. I loved John Wooden, still do. Got a chance to meet him once, and just adored the guy. And I think because of Wooden, I just loved UCLA. So it was a dream come true to go to grad school there. I loved it. It hit me because I had graduated from BYU and had that experience. And then UCLA, I couldn't help but notice, I don't mean to say this to be condescending, but at UCLA, you seem to be just kind of treated as an adult. You could kind of do what you want and decide what you want and drink what you want or not drink what you want. And everybody seemed to get along. And there wasn't this surveillance feeling of being, surveilled all the time. So that was kind of a thought that came to mind.
You were studying what?
Finance and real estate, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So as you kind of put an outline together of kind of the, interesting things you mentioned at the beginning, but like Heaven's Gate, World Trade Center, the Pulse nightclub, Sandy Hook, O.J. Simpson, Katrina. I don't think you're just mentioning those as kind of like a who's who kind of thing.
Right.
But I get a sense that many of those experiences in your career, maybe there were pieces from those experiences that ended up informing your eventual questioning of the church. And so, like, maybe just talk us through your career, things that would be really interesting, but also if they touch on your processing Mormonism, that's super interesting.
Yeah, each of these, I've had hundreds of cases, but I picked a few that really kind of resonated with my Mormon story. Heaven's Gate.
For those who don't know what that is,
I can't. You're right, John. Some people don't know. Heaven's Gate was the biggest mass suicide in the history of the United States. It was a big mansion in San Diego, and this cult, the Heaven's Gate cult, committed mass suicide by eating poisonous pudding. And
how many people?
39
died.
Yeah, and there was a 40th guy who was trying to get in. And that was part of the story a lot of the public doesn't know about.
So the Jim Jones thing was bigger, but it was in Guyana, so it doesn't count.
That was the world's biggest.
Okay,
yeah, the U.S. was Heaven's Gate.
Okay.
I worked on that case for a couple of years, and I really got acquainted in a secular academic way with cult and cult behavior and what drives a cult. And I went through the home many times figuring out what made this whole thing tick. And I always took offense at when people called the Mormon Church a cult. I didn't like that. And frankly, I still don't. I think when I think of a cult, I think of Heaven's Gate. And what happened at Heaven's Gate was, regardless of what people feel about with Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses or Scientology, that's a whole different level than what goes on in these kind of cults, because it's truly evil in terms of brainwashing people to the point of killing themselves. And that's what happened there. And I was very curious how he made that happen. And the leader of the cult, his name was Doe. His real name was Marshall Applewhite. And he took away the ability or necessity of anybody to think. Every light switch was labeled. Every jar was labeled. Everything in the closet was labeled. Every drawer was labeled. And so you never had to think for yourself about anything. Everything was pre-programmed. You literally went 2 by 2 everywhere you went into the house. You went to the bathroom with somebody next to you. And there was a deliberate effort to delete and negate any independent thinking at an extreme level. And that's how he got away with this crazy scheme. And so this is part of my journey, but more in the defense of the Mormon Church. That I don't like when people call the Mormon Church a cult, and I don't like name calling in general. Honestly.
Okay. And as you learned about Heaven's Gate, did you make any connections at the time to Joseph Smith?
None.
Okay.
None. I don't.
That's fine.
Yeah, I didn't. I put it on there because it was more like, I'm going through these cases, I'm having these things, but I wore a lot of this like a badge of honor, like, as a defense for the church to some degree, which I still kind of do. The World Trade Center, I worked on that, and that was religious fanaticism. But again, in a very toxic, horrific sense of the word. I mentioned the Pulse nightclub because that's where I changed my views. Even though I stayed in the church, I changed my views on the LGBT issue completely. I was horrified with what I saw in there. I can't even talk about it without getting emotional. So I'm a true LGBT ally. So each of these cases, I'm happy to discuss or not discuss whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So the Pulse nightclub was a shooter going in and shooting up
dozens of gay men.
Yeah.
And I've been to a lot of crime scenes. A lot of them, most crime scenes don't make the news or make only the local news. I've been to innumerable crime scenes with the work that I do, but the Pulse nightclub was probably the singular most horrific thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
Were you part of Prop 8 before the Pulse nightclub? And do you want to talk about that?
Oh, gee. Yeah. It's so embarrassing. I was living in Laguna Beach.
Give our listeners, for those who don't have any idea what even Prop 8 was.
Yeah. Okay.
Back it up. And just from your perspective, you're a Mormon, raising your family. It's 2008, Southern California. And tell us, what the state of marriage was at the time, and then how your Mormon church experience all of a sudden starts introducing some complexity into your life.
Yeah. Well, I was living in Laguna Beach with my family, and and at the time marriage was defined as a one man, one woman. And, that was just considered society's norm.
That was your belief.
Yeah.
But the state of California had a different.
Well, the state of California had a different idea that was called Prop 8, Proposition 8. It was on the ballot.
Wait, before Prop 8 got on the ballot, wasn't same-sex marriage legal in California? Wasn't that the whole point? Prop 8 was to take away.
Yeah. Excuse me, John, you remember it better than I do. Yeah, I think the state of California had allowed same-sex marriage as some other states had. I think Hawaii and some others. And California was next.
Do you remember as a devout Mormon how you would have felt with California legalizing same-sex marriage? Do you remember?
Well, on me personally, I could have cared less. Back then.
Okay.
Even as a true believing Mormon, I didn't care.
You didn't care.
No.
But then all of a sudden, in 2008, the church decides it's going to fight same-sex marriage in California because the philosophy was, as goes California, so goes the nation. So the Mormon church, one of its worst nightmares was at the time, and to this day continues to be, massive acceptance of same-sex marriage. The church did not want that to happen. California legalizes it. And so the Mormon church decides we're going to, in a sovereign U.S. state, we're going to spend as much money and as much volunteer effort and as much corporate effort as we can to take same-sex marriage away from a sovereign U.S. state, meaning California.
Yeah.
So that's the backdrop. Sorry, I didn't mean to kind of put you on the spot there. As you're just a member trying to raise your family, a Mormon in California, how did you hear about it?
Well, very uniquely, because I got a call, I forget from who, saying that the church was very, very opposed to same-sex marriage. And this is frankly a low moment of my life, that they called me to run the show with Prop 8 in Laguna Beach. And I say that with nothing but embarrassment at this point. But
Well, what did that entail?
well, they said that they wanted to keep it off all the church books, so meet in family and members' homes. Don't meet at the church. And so we met in a home in Laguna Beach. I was the leader. We were given bundles of yard posts, the little signs you post in your front yard, and bumper stickers and signs to, stand on corners with. And I'm in charge, and I frankly wasn't that concerned about the issue. It just didn't resonate with me as being a horribly important issue, but it was the church's issue, and I supported the church. And so
do you remember what you felt when they told you this was going to be their position and that you were going to be leading it for your ward? Do you remember what you felt?
I felt very conflicted, but I'm embarrassed to admit I went along with it. You go along to get along, I guess. And so we organize, we organize these things, and again, to be fair to the Mormon Church, it wasn't just the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church was really, as far as I could see, the strongest behind it. But the vote won, and we were out, with the signs and the banners and the this and the that. And
would you knock doors on Saturdays?
Yes.
So you were organizing campaigns where you guys would canvass. Mormons would canvass neighborhoods, knock on doors.
Right.
And what would you say when you knocked on the door?
Well, we'd say, I'm living in the neighborhood and I'm campaigning on Prop 8. How do you feel about it? If somebody was very I support Prop 8, yes on 8, we'd say, okay, thanks. We're just kind of keeping a tally. But if we found somebody that was a little more indifferent, we would kind of share some reasons why, we thought that was a bad idea or so forth.
Do you remember because the church would have trained you, they would have sent you videos training you on why same-sex marriage was a bad idea. Do you remember what those arguments were?
I think that was traumatic. I think I've repressed some of those memories. I don't remember the videos. I'm not saying they didn't happen. I just don't remember.
I'm sure it would have been something about children fare better when raised with a mother and a father in the
statistics
home.
and some of the sociology studies that come out, that kind of thing. It was more the standing on the corners, putting the signs up, at night, the other side, would come through, the neighborhoods and take all the signs down. We go and put them all back up. It was just kind of bantering back and forth. It wasn't a high point of my life. It was embarrassing, but yeah, it happened. And, oh man.
What are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling embarrassment, and I'm skipping ahead to when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with Sam Young, and one of our buddies, a new friend of mine, his name's Gregory, and he's gay. He grew up Mormon, and I had to apologize to him because, and I always do, because I think it's something I'm embarrassed about, I'm ashamed of. And I think it's healing for the LGBT community to hear apologies, and it's healing for me to give them. And that's what I'm feeling, is regret and sorrow.
What would you want to say to an LGBT person who's watching?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I had anything to do with that thing. I'm sorry that I did things that added to your stress, to your whatever you're going through. That I contributed to a really ugly point in California history and national history, and I was on the wrong side, and I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I get it if somebody still holds a grudge, but so far they haven't. Yeah.
Thank you, Randy. So when Prop 8 won, do you remember what you felt? I mean, I imagine you would have been in that mentality, so you would have been happy at the time.
At the time, I'm ashamed I did. I was on the phone with the stake president and Whitney Clayton. Is that his name?
Mm-hmm. L. Whitney Clayton?
Yeah. And
he was your stake president at the time?
No, he was down in Newport Beach. I was in Laguna Beach. But he was upset it didn't win by a bigger margin. I recall his response. It was like, dude, you're not down here, on the street corners every day. And, but that was his response. And it was an ugly, ugly period. Yeah.
And so now let's just assume your position on LGBT people and same-sex marriage would have stayed consistent. Then you get the call that you're involved in the Pulse nightclub shootings, where a shooter goes in and guns down, dozens of gay men in Orlando?
Yeah, in Orlando.
What was it about that experience that transformed you? How did it transform you? Because religious beliefs can be resilient, right?
They can be, but this was more powerful. The guy that went in, the shooter, was a religious fanatic. And I don't remember the case well enough to know the particulars, so I don't want to guess, but I do remember that. And the amount of blood I saw. I've never seen, like I say, I worked on the World Trade Center. I've seen horrible sites of horrible tragedy, but that one, that and Sandy Hook, where the kids were harmed and killed, I have a hard time talking about it to this day. It's ugly. It's ugly stuff.
And so how did that affect your faith? You see the horror.
Mm-hmm.
Then what connections did you make to your Mormon beliefs?
I wasn't, all I could say is that I walked out the door of the Pulse nightclub. I was just the owner and me. And
within how many days of the?
Well, it was fresh enough. Okay. I don't know the number of days, but it was fresh enough. And the bullet holes were looked like cannonballs. I mean, they were just, and he told me what went on there. I don't think I could even share it without having a total meltdown. But I can't explain it other than I just carved that part of my thinking out from the rest of the Mormon church. And I just said to myself, it's quite clear they've got this one totally wrong, period. And I carved it out. And I went on being Mormon, but on that point, I just knew the church was wrong. I had been wrong, and I admit it.
So it sounds like you're saying that it was a direct relation between noticing how religious fanaticism can lead to so many bodies piling up of people being so bigoted in their beliefs, causing them to do horrible things to people in a marginalized community.
Yeah.
But I think most Mormons that would be listening to that, they can separate, well, nobody in the Mormon church would ever take a gun and do something that horrible. But it sounds like in your mind, you said that any kind of bigotry, we don't know what kind of, it might not be in a nightclub, but it could be, the suicide totals. Was that kind of what you're going with?
It's kind of that we were contributing. We were not where we should have been and just opposed, flat opposed. Jesus taught explicitly that we should reach out to the marginalized people, not add to their burden. Give me a break. And I was adding to their burden. And whether it be LGBT or children or women or the homeless or the incarcerated, I don't want to be part of anything that contributes to anyone's misery, period.
Talk about how you drew a connection between your involvement in the O.J. Simpson case and women.
Well, the O.J. Simpson case was, I was living it while everybody else was watching it, because I was working with Mr. Brown, Lou Brown, Nicole Brown Simpson's father. And in that family, I have permission from the family to talk about this a little bit. It wasn't a racial case within the family. In the media, it was. But I sat at the kitchen table with that family, and it had nothing to do with race. It had to do with spousal abuse and domestic violence, which is another very ugly topic. And I distinctly remember sitting at the kitchen table, and everybody was there. Mrs. Brown was there, Mr. Brown, Tanya, Denise. And I realized I was sitting in the empty chair created by Nicole. And it hit me that it just hit me. And
Can I just jump in and say, one of the best documentaries I've ever seen is called O.J. Simpson Made in America. Mm-hmm. Let's add that to the show notes. But it talks about how Nicole had made several phone calls to the police, mm-hmm. and even to the point where police had come, she had a bruised face. It was really clear that she was being physically battered by O.J. Simpson. Mm-hmm. And there was kind of this boys club. Forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but my memory is that there was this kind of boys club where it's like, well, he's too famous and he's a good football player and we like him. Mm-hmm. And she's just a woman. And like, if the police maybe had done their job, maybe Nicole would have had a very different fate. Is that the sense you got, or?
Well, I think that's all accurate. I think it's that, but it goes a little deeper. If I can explain, when I was at the kitchen table, Denise is a really wonderful, upbeat, fun person. You would like Denise.
Who's that? Nicole's
sister.
Okay.
She was the one with dark hair in the trial quite a bit. And she was, and for reasons that I wholly agree with and support her, she was pissed. She was beyond pissed because she loved her sister, and it was just a horrific thing. Forget who did it, or just to lose your sister like that. I can't even wrap my head around that. And she was mad. And then there was this magical moment. I'll never forget it. I was sitting right there. And she just went quiet, and the whole table went quiet. And it's as if a light bulb went on or something illuminated within her psyche. And she says, you know what? I'm going to take all this grief, I'm going to take all my anger, and I'm going to take all of my rage, and I'm going to channel it into helping battered women. And she says, I now know all the experts in the field, and my sister is not going to have died in vain. I'm going to make this a talking point where exactly what you just referred to, John, with the police and the good old boys club, we're going to turn the lights on these cockroaches, and we're going to turn the lights on to this bad thinking, this flawed thinking, and make this a discussion point, because there's more light, the more the disinfectant to this societal problem. And I saw her transform from being really, really upset to really, really just this inner strength. And it was magical. It was miraculous in my mind. And so in my mind, it was about, it woke me up, just like each of these cases is kind of waking me up to something. It woke me up to what women were going through. The fact that a guy could beat up that never happened in my family. I've never harmed a woman. That just doesn't happen. But that's not to say everybody enjoys that
Privilege,
reality.
Yeah.
And where it does happen, it needs to be talked about. And that's how I viewed the whole case, really.
Did you make connections to the status of women in the Mormon Church at that point, or not so much?
That came later.
Okay.
But at the time, Denise later asked me to be on her board of directors, and I have been to many meetings where a line of women out the door would be there to thank her for the courage to get out of these lousy relationships. And that started waking me up that, I was born with a lot of privilege, just as a tall white guy in Orange County. And not everybody enjoys that privilege. And maybe I need to pay more attention to what women go through, or Black people go through, or gay people go through, children go through. We haven't gotten there yet.
Go ahead.
Sandy Hook,
Was that the Amish community?
No, Sandy Hook was where the shooter went into the elementary school. And I met with the mayor, I met with the chief of police in my consulting role. And the chief of police was you could tell he just couldn't talk about it, what he actually saw. It was just, but I learned enough that it's beyond horrific. These nut jobs out there talking about conspiracy theories are really harming real families that have been through real tragedy. I remember denying that any kids were killed. It's absurd. But I don't know. Each of these cases are waking me up out of this cocoon that I'm in.
So what did you learn as it related to your religious beliefs from Sandy Hook?
Just that children are the most vulnerable. And I think that's the brilliance of Sam Young, that there's both covert and overt abuse, and they're both very, very harmful. And while I had good bishops, and I think Sam had good bishops, there are these guys out there that are untrained that cause enormous harm with bringing up inappropriate topics. I mean, my story is kind of, in a way, it's kind of funny in a way, but not really. To bring up topics with kids one-on-one, and some of these guys are perverts, let's be real. Just the whole sensitivity to the vulnerability of children. And we need to really, as a society and as a church, we need to wake up to some of this stuff and get on board.
Yeah. I noticed on your list, Katrina and kind of natural disasters. That's a classic kind of viewing suffering in mass. That's something.
Well, it's like, why could God let this happen? God caused this disaster, if you want to look at it that way. And I saw thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of houses. Every house represents a family whose lives were blown apart. It was on a scale that you can't even imagine. The media covered just a tiny part of that. They're still recovering today.
This is New Orleans, right?
What's that?
Is this New Orleans?
Yeah. Well, it went along the whole Gulf Coast.
Right.
Yeah. So I had a lot of questions there about God and how God could allow a natural disaster like this to harm and kill a lot of people. The ones that got away were lucky, but they had their homes literally blown apart. So these are all kind of waking me up to stuff.
And then you've got Bikini Atoll and Chernobyl.
Yeah.
You've got a couple around institutional and Bhopal about institutional corruption.
Well, I went out to Bhopal, India, and I worked on the Bikini Atoll case for 7 years. And the other one, I think, is Chernobyl. These are all cases of institutional corruption. And I don't believe all institutions are corrupt, but my doctorate degree is in sociology, and I can't help but wonder about, institutional corruption. And I saw a lot of that in those three cases. So it's like my brain, I'm in the bubble, but my brain is kind of popping off like popcorn with these cases one after another, waking me up to all these kind of issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what year do you kind of put your faith crisis as kind of beginning? Do you have a year for it?
I have a specific day for it.
Okay.
I can't, it's in my journal, but it's about 5 years ago.
And prior to that, okay, so let's say 5 years ago, give us the status. Are you still married 5 years ago to your first spouse?
No.
Do you want to talk about your kids or first marriage before you?
Yeah, I just want to say my kids are awesome. I have 4 kids. They're all adults. They're beautiful kids. And I'm very proud of each of them. Some are in the church, some are not. And I support them both.
Okay. Was divorce in the Mormon church hard?
It was painfully hard. It was her decision. There had been no abuse, no addiction, no, what are the 3 A's? Abuse, addiction, adultery. I don't know. There was none of that. But I was sitting in sacrament meeting and it just wasn't cutting. I was in so much emotional pain.
Was this post-divorce?
This was during the divorce.
Okay.
And I had lunch with Denise Brown once.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Did you feel like Mormonism prepared you for healthy marriage?
No, not in the least.
Why not?
Well, I'll compare and contrast it. There was no real discussion about, how many kids are you going to have, just the fundamentals. And I can't help but, kind of compare that to a Christian church I'm aware of where they're very proud of the fact that people go through kind of a premarital classes, and they're very proud of the fact that half of them break off their engagement because they're not ready to get married. But getting back to Mormonism, no, I didn't feel like I was prepared at all. I didn't know what I was doing.
Did you feel like being an Orthodox devout Mormon was healthy for your marriage or unhealthy or neutral to your developing family and your developing relationship?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think in some ways it's healthy because you had kind of a common interest and a common place to go on Sundays and, support for one another with callings, and the kids are going to various activities. In other ways, I don't know that it was particularly helpful. It was a mixed bag for me, just speaking for myself.
What were the teachings and what was the kind of stigma around divorce that you would have contemplated as the prospects of divorce were starting to emerge?
Well, they had emerged, and I'll explain to you. I was in the sacrament meeting. It is the best way to explain it. And I was in deep emotional pain. And I remember I sat there because I'd had lunch with Denise Brown with the OJ case. And Denise said something I'll never forget. She says, she calls me Randall. She said, Randall, you got to understand something. When a guy hits a woman, it leaves a bruise for 2 weeks and it heals. And it hurts, but it heals. Emotional abuse may not ever heal. It may go on for months, years, or never heal. And I was feeling that through the divorce. And and I was sitting there in the middle of the sacrament meeting, and I just was in deep emotional hurting. And I thought, this thought came to me, and I think it was a Jesus thing, where some lesson related to Jesus, but it was like, if you find somebody less fortunate than yourself and help them out, it helps relieve your pain. And I thought, well, this sacrament meeting isn't cutting it. And I literally got up. I wasn't, inappropriate or anything, but I went out into the foyer and I went down the street in Laguna Beach to the homeless shelter, walked in and found the executive director. And I said, hey, I just finished my PhD. I'd like to teach life skills to the homeless, like goal setting, time management, negotiation skills, just like like we talk about them, in business. And she thought it was a great idea, and I did that. And that was a profound lesson for me in terms of kind of healing from the divorce, finding people that were less fortunate and trying to help them out a little bit.
And for those who have never been Mormon, what are the church's teachings about marriage and eternal marriage? And then what what does an Orthodox Mormon feel when their marriage falls apart?
Well, in Mormonism, it's not just, till marriage is not till death do you part. It's marriage for eternity. And the idea is that you're married in the temple, you're sealed together in the temple, and that your family's together forever. And
your children are sealed.
Your children are sealed to you, and there's an unbreakable bond. And without the temple marriage and the temple sealing, then, who knows what happens? It's a train wreck, I guess.
You're not with your children and your family in heaven, basically.
Yeah. The best way to sum it up is, families can be together forever. And so you're taught this, and you think you have that forever family. And then your spouse decides to file for divorce, and then all of that blows up, and your kids who you love dearly are like, Dad, are we going to be together as a family forever? And that's heartbreaking. I mean, that sucks. I mean, what do you do with that? It's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell your kids, sorry, all your Mormon friends have forever families, but you don't.
I took a different tact. I said, yeah, well, of course we're still together forever. I mean, it's absurd that we wouldn't be.
You went off script.
I went off script quite easily. I don't know. I just did.
Okay.
Yeah.
But would it be fair to call that devastating to have your eternal marriage break up? I mean, it sounds like maybe you weren't super happy in your relationship.
Well, I was more concerned about the kids. With me, my feelings didn't matter much. It was painful for me to see the trauma to my kids.
Okay.
That was, for me, the roughest part of the whole deal.
And how long were you single after divorce in the Mormon church? Because I've heard that one of the most brutal states to be in as a Mormon is as a divorced single person in the church. Or it's just as a never married single, because the church is just families, parenting, kids.
Yeah.
So if you're single, you just feel like a loser. I've heard.
Well, I felt like a loser, for sure. It's horribly awkward. The bishop was calling my kids saying, why hasn't your dad come see me? Why don't you call me and ask me why? It's because he has no training. There's really nothing
seeing you in what?
Me to come in and talk to him because I was going through a divorce.
Oh.
I didn't see the point in talking to him. No disrespect to the guy. He's a great guy, but he has no training in any of this. And, I was meeting with people who had training, in the topic. So,
did you feel shame?
Well, shame is something that who you are. Guilt is something I did wrong. I had done nothing wrong. Shame, yes. I felt shame because that's how you feel in this religious environment where marriage is given this position, if you will. Mm-hmm. So it was a mess. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a mess.
So how many years between your divorce and that faith crisis beginning?
Well, the sequence goes, I got divorced. I waited in California 6 months, I waited to whatever the judge. And then I contacted my old BYU, a girl I dated at BYU who, she was too cool for me back in the day, but she decided to take another look at me, and I got remarried reasonably quickly.
Okay.
And, happily with her. So but my heart goes out to those guys that do get divorced and, didn't have that scenario.
So you weren't single in the church for a long time?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, take us to the day of your faith crisis.
Well, this is the day.
What year again?
It's 5 years ago.
So 2016, 17.
Yeah.
Which one?
I honestly don't remember.
All right.
It's about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I was a true believing Mormon. I was sitting at my house on the kitchen, granite counter thing, and on my laptop. And I love the church. I'm curious. I'm naturally very curious. So I'm kind of browsing around different things. I decided to go, what's new with the church? And I'm browsing around, and up pops this thing that says Nauvoo and polygamy. And I look at the URL, and it says LDS.org. Oh, and I'm reading it, and it's saying that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And it was like, what the heck? My head exploded. And I read it, and I come up with this word that I'd never seen before called polyandry. And polyandry means that one guy's, how does it work? I don't know, it's so messed up.
It's where a woman would be married to multiple men. So so basically a woman would be married to some man in Nauvoo, her husband.
Yeah.
And then Joseph Smith would proposition her.
Yeah.
Sometimes while the husband was sent on a mission or sent away. And then Joseph Smith would literally marry a woman who was already married.
Yeah.
That's polyandry, multiple men.
Multiple men, one
single woman.
Yeah. And then as if that wasn't weird enough, I kept reading, and I came across that infamous statement that Joseph Smith married women or girls as young as
a few months
short of their 15th birthday.
A few months shy of their 15th birthday. Yeah.
And
that was the way the church could say he married 14-year-olds without saying he married 14-year-olds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is, I'm embarrassed to say a lot of the things I'm saying today, but I was embarrassed to say I didn't believe it. I had dinner once with Todd Compton, who wrote the book on sacred loneliness, who documented all this. And I thought Todd was a really nice guy and very studious, but Todd Compton, I didn't believe him. I just thought he was some academic that was finding some weird old journals that were messed up, because Joseph Smith said he was not a polygamist. And so in my shock of what I was reading right in front of me, I literally turned off my laptop. I powered it down. I didn't just go to sleep. I powered it down. I unplugged it. I waited 15 seconds, and then I waited another 15 seconds. Then I plugged it back in, open up the laptop, reboot, go straight to LDS.org, go straight to that essay, and there it was. And in an instant, I'm out of the church. That's not the thing that kept resonating in my head. Was those are not my values. I must have heard that a million times ringing through my head. Those are not my values. And they may be someone else's values, or someone else might condone that, but they're not my values. Now, and I don't say that hopefully sounding like, self-righteous or, Mother Teresa, but that's crazy. And then I didn't say anything to anybody about it that day. I was just in utter shock. You could feel the amygdala and the adrenaline and all the signs of classic shock. I go to bed that night. I wake up, and it dawned on me, wait a minute. Not only that, but this thing with Fanny Alger happened in 1833.
Explain to our non-Mormon viewers who Fanny Alger is, what happened, and what was shocking about it.
Fanny Alger was a young girl living in the Smith home.
And Joseph Smith and Emma's
Joseph
home.
Smith and Emma's home
in Kirtland in the early 1830s.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're the scriptor, you're the historian, but he was having an affair with her in the barn, and was it Oliver Cowdery?
Oliver Cowdery, who was co-president.
Yeah.
Karen and I just did a TikTok about this, right, Karen?
Yeah.
Oliver Cowdery, who was co-president of the church at the time, somehow discovers that Joseph Smith was in an adulterous affair with Fanny Alger.
Yeah.
And he calls him on it, and Joseph Smith's reaction was?
Excommunicate him. Yeah. How's that go? So I was just in shock. And the next day I realized that from Fanny Alger in 1833, I did the math. The gospel topic essays came out in 2014. I found out them later because they didn't publicize them. They were kind of top secret, hidden on the website. And that's 181 years where not a single general conference talk, not a single church magazine ever mentioned this. I went on a mission going door to door saying Joseph Smith was faithful to his one wife, Emma. And yet for 181 years, these church leaders are concealing this reality. And then I was so desperate. I was going through all the classic, shock and denial. I went to Fair Mormon. I saw, I didn't even really know who Fair Mormon was. But I was so desperate to find some kind of explanation for this that made sense. I read their explanation, and my head doubly exploded because it was just such a ridiculous explanation. I don't really remember what it was, but it was just silly. It was adolescent explanations.
You're saying to like justify Joseph's affair with Fanny and just the polygamy in general?
The whole enchilada, but mainly Joseph Smith's polygamy, and the fact I found that quote where Joseph Smith, going back to my friend Lori in high school, that quote I looked up that said, "What a thing it is for a man to be accused of having 7 wives when I can only find one." As like that's what propelled me for decades, was that, frankly, untruth spoken by Joseph Smith that carried on for decades, and I was out in an instant. Some people it builds up. For me, I was in the church happy. I was not looking for any reason to leave. I was content, despite Prop 8, despite all the stuff. But I'm out.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Because a lot of people will hear that and think to themselves, okay, so it's not your values, but God's ways are higher than your ways. There's going to be things that you don't understand. Why can't you just, wrestle with the Lord, ask for answers, and maybe answers will come in the next life, but you still need to remain faithful, hold to the iron rod? Why were you not able to continue on that path?
Yeah, kind of like put those issues on the shelf, metaphorically.
Yes.
Speaking.
Yeah. Maybe someone else can do it. I can't do it. That's not a question to be answered later. That's an answer we have today that's answered today. And those are not values I can defend. I can't defend that. It's absurd.
Yeah, and then you think about all of the ramifications of Joseph's polygamy on the women and subsequent prophets and the way that they practice polygamy. And the more you learn, the more you realize that it wasn't just a one-time mess up of a prophet, that there are real women's and men's lives and children's lives.
Yeah. I started listening to Lindsay Hanson Parks' Was a Year of Polygamy.
Yeah.
I couldn't. It was just too much. It was so horrific. I probably should, get back on the saddle and listen to that whole thing, but it was just, it's horrible. How do you defend that? You can't defend that.
Those are where their heart-wrenching stories were. And when you were mentioning the stories about in England of women being converted and going over, your polygamy is where I first learned those stories about women who were converted by missionaries who they themselves would have 10 wives back home or whatever, while saying we don't practice polygamy, lying through their teeth to try to get more women, saving usually the more attractive ones for themselves, you know, and some women getting all the way out to Salt Lake City before even knowing that they were basically sex trafficked, and now they have no way to get home, and they're a polygamous wife for life now. Like, it's those real life stories where it's not just Joseph messed up and there's a horrible cataclysmic. I mean, if you study natural disasters and other disasters in the world, like the way polygamy affected Mormonism and people who are just trying to follow Jesus Christ, that's a disaster on Mormonism. Like, there are ripple effects today in all the polygamous communities. There's no denying that,
Couldn't agree with you more. I studied disasters as a career, and I have a pretty high threshold for trauma. I don't say it's unlimited. I got to take breaks, but I've seen some real train wrecks. That was one that I couldn't see any way to put back together. No way. But that's my story. That's me. I can't speak for anyone else, but those, again, that's just not my values.
So were you going to say something, Kara?
No, but I will just say, I love that. I love that you just put it down as simply as those are not my values. And a lot of people, myself included, went through a very quick faith crisis where something just told me it was wrong and there's no fitting everything back in the box again. Yeah. And anyone who, if statutory rape is your value, please don't talk to me ever again. On the record, that's not one of my values for sure. Like, I will never be okay with a prophet, somebody saying they speak for God. And that's the value that they want to move forward with the church.
totally
So I
get
love
it.
the way that you worded that.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I'm going to both simultaneously push back on you a tiny bit about one thing you said earlier and play devil's advocate.
Sure. Bring it
So
on.
I'm finessing both the critical and apologetic view simultaneously.
Okay.
So you talked about Heaven's Gate and
Yeah.
cults.
Yeah.
I think you also have on your list being involved in Charles Manson,
Yeah.
Satan. Oh, the La Palazza Mansion.
Oh, that was
which
a
is-
devil worship case in Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've seen the darkest sides of cults, and I'm
Yeah.
going to grant you that. And you don't like people calling the Mormon Church a cult. And we
Right.
on Mormon Stories try not to ever do that either. So we're kind of with you on that. And I'm going to just highlight the fact that one of the things we learned from Stephen Hassan's book is that, you know, the bite model, that what cults do is they control behavior in excessive ways, but they also, that's the B. The I is they control information from their members so that their members can't have thoughts like this church isn't true. My founding prophet was a sexual predator, you know, and so they keep the information from their members so that they can control their thoughts. That's the I and the T of Stephen Hassan's bite model.
Right.
We've had Stephen Hassan on Mormon Stories before. We'll reference that in the show notes and his book as well in the show notes. But here's my pushback on that. So what a Mormon apologist would say to you is, Randy, that's on you. The fact that you didn't know that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, that's on you. Like, and so now I'm going to go through all the different ways you could have known that as an apologist. I'm going to take the road of an apologist, and I want you to defend yourself as to why you didn't get the information that I, as Mormon apologist, would say you should have had access to. So I'm going to begin
Okay.
back in UCLA, your own alma mater, Fawn Brody. She wrote that book in 1945. It says everything in the CES letter, 80% of it is there in Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History, the polygamy, the Book of Abraham, the Book of Mormon, the anachronisms, the Kirtland Bank scandal, the Masonic Lodge stuff and the temple ceremony. All of that was in Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History, and she was faculty at UCLA, your alma mater. So why didn't you learn all that? I mean, we're going to go through each one. Why didn't you learn all that through Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History? You had decades to pick up that book and read it.
Great, valid question. And 2020 site is so clear, isn't it? The my response to that is
Had you ever heard of that book growing up?
sure. And I had, like I say, I knew that there were allegations of Joseph Smith's polygamy back in high school. It's just that I had been, for lack of a better word, programmed to believe it was all anti-Mormon lies. And I remember distinctly with Fawn Brody's book, the comeback, you know, the church has a very witty way of having these little, you know, snappy things, but where somebody got up and said, well, no man knows your history, and especially you, or something like that. It was a little comeback saying that Fawn Brody was making up stuff. And, you know, you get this idea in the church that the church has all these enemies lurking around, and they're dark and, you know, dark people that you stay away from in terms of their thinking. So looking back, I can just say I feel very, very gullible. It's funny, you know, I got a big group of friends from BYU that moved back to Southern California. And every year we get together for Christmas dinners. And every year it seemed like somebody else was dropping out of the church. Guess who was the last one to drop out of the church? It was me. You know, I have this weakness apparently. And once I kind of anchor to something, I hold on to it. And that's something I'm very aware of now.
So how did the church teach you to view No Man Knows My History? And
As
Fawn Brody?
anti-Mormon, garbage, junk, don't waste your time with it kind
Okay.
of stuff.
You mentioned knowing about the Tanners relatively early on. The Tanners started in the early 1960s.
Yeah.
You would have had all the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
Yeah.
Utah Lighthouse Ministry has been going for a long time. We've had Sandra Tanner on our show. You've had almost a half century to pick up some of Sandra Tanner or Gerald Tanner's work. What happened?
I was on autopilot. I was in the church. I was content. I was happy. There was no real.
What have you been taught about the Tanners?
Oh, I've been taught the Tanners were just horrible people, that were just satanic and evil and liars and deceivers, and pick an adjective, pick a mean name, and you can call it the Tanners. I'd heard it all.
Okay, so all through the 70s and 80s and 90s, Sunstone was publishing stuff, Dialogue was publishing stuff, like Journal of Mormon History. You could have learned accurate Mormon history through Sunstone, Dialogue, and that sort of thing. Why didn't you learn it through that?
It didn't resonate with me. Sunstone, I went to one conference. A friend invited me to go to a Sunstone conference. I went. I didn't get it. I would admit that I was very, very gullible and very, very content where I was. My career was going great. My kids were doing great. Those were my focus. And I thought I had heard all the anti-Mormon stuff on my mission from the Church of England vicars and people, there. And I thought that was kind of a completed task. And I was on autopilot. I wasn't thinking critically, which is so embarrassing because that's what I do in my professional life, is think critically. My whole doctoral program was thinking critically, and epistemologies and hermeneutics and phenomenology and the scientific method and empirical evidence. So I was blasting off to the stratosphere in my professional life, but in my personal life, I was just, frankly, I was a lazy learner. I was just a lazy learner. I plead guilty. Guilty as charged.
I don't think you were lazy. I think you were Mormon, because I think this is how, I call it the bubble, but the church, I don't even think it's intentional on the church's part to deceive, but the church carefully grooms us from infancy to stay away from non-approved sources of information.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I call it the bubble, but we are carefully groomed. And this is where the church, I'll use the term cultish. This is where the Mormon church strays into the air of being cultish, because members are carefully, instead of like, hey, learn the truth, we'll teach you the truth, read the hardest criticisms, and then you can develop a stronger faith. No, Mormonism is stay away from anything that isn't approved literature. And that way you can get into your 50s or 60s and never know that the founder of your own religion had 30 to 40 wives.
Yeah.
And you don't know that post-internet. Because like I was going to go on and say, all right, well, blogs and podcasts start emerging in 2004, 2005. Why didn't you learn it through blogs and podcasts? And your answer would be?
I couldn't ever imagine the church withholding or deceiving or not being forthright. As I was taught, since I was, a little pollywog, is be honest, don't be a jerk, tell the truth, even if it's embarrassing, repent. And I just naturally assumed that the church was, living by those same standards. And all of that came along, all the internet and all this, and I was just kind of anchored to those original experiences, even though they were obsolete, quite obviously. And I look back at it now, and you laugh or you cry, but it wasn't smart.
So when the Gospel Topics essays come out in 2013, 2014, why didn't you learn then?
Well, they weren't advertised. I don't know anybody that knew about them. I came across them quite accidentally. I wasn't looking for a reason to leave the church. These excuses and this nonsense about why people leave the church, I just got to call it BS. I wasn't looking to leave. I was completely happy as a member. I took great pride in the fact that there was an unbroken chain of missionary service, right? Father to son and the Bell family, right back to Nauvoo. I was happy being part of that legacy. I liked defending the church. I like a good debate. I'm not afraid of a brawl, intellectual or anything else. But boy, I was, what can I say?
No, the church leaders are on record. Like you keep talking as though it's your own oversight. The church leaders like Elder Snow, Elder Marlon Jensen are on record admitting that they produced those essays to have plausible deniability. They had to put them on the internet, but they intentionally made sure that members would not learn about them that they would only be made available on a need-to-know basis.
Right.
And that they were intentionally hid from not just members, but from leaders, even after they were published. And they're on record admitting that.
Right.
So it's not on you, Randy.
Well, thanks for reminding me of that, because you can beat yourself up over this stuff.
And once the excommunication started happening in 2013, 14, and 15, do you even remember hearing about all the excommunications of critics and of feminists and, intellectuals? Once all this excommunication started happening, did that even?
Well, yeah.
Did you even find out about it?
No, I heard about it, but I didn't pay much attention to it. My attention was on, I'm having a tough thing at marriage, and I love my kids with all my heart. I was putting my energy, frankly, where it should have been as a dad, paying attention to my kids. But I heard about that stuff, but it was just, I didn't spend any time with it, regrettably.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, don't beat yourself up.
Yeah.
So did this polygamy polyandry thing send you down the rabbit hole? Did you start studying all the other truth claims issues too, and talk about that experience of you laughed, so I'm assuming that's a yes. And do you want to, I had you at the beginning talk about all the things you were taught that were not true in terms of Mormon history and truth claims. Do you want to talk about all the things I like to have our interviewees take time to describe in detail everything they learned when they went down the rabbit hole about the factual church history and the problems with the church's truth claims.
Yeah, well, I was out with that one, but then I mentioned I went to Fair Mormon, and I was shocked at how many other issues there were.
Which ones?
Well, let's start with the Peep Stone and a hat.
What about it?
Well, I had been taught when I was young that Joseph Smith had a literal set of gold plates, and he was translating that into English to create the Book of Mormon. And I was shocked to find out that what he actually did was put a stone he found in a well in a hat and put his head into the hat, and the gold plates were never in the room. According to any witness, the gold plates were not even there. And that took me back into the realm of Joseph Smith and magical thinking, and the fact that he had a criminal record from using this Peep Stone to con farmers and others for treasure digging. I didn't know about. I had heard that stuff, but that was all anti-Mormon lies. And then I'm reading the church.
So what you're kind of saying is that Sandra Tanner and Fawn Brody and Gerald Tanner were actually telling the truth, even though you had been conditioned to believe they were liars.
Well, that, and I also called my old friend up, Lori from high school. Remember her? Yeah. I called her up, and I hadn't talked to her in years. And I said, Lori, do you remember that day you brought me that stuff in high school? And she goes, yeah, I do remember that. And I said, I apologize.
Why are you getting emotional?
Well, because Lori's a kind person. She was looking out for my own interests. Her pastor was telling the truth. Lori was telling the truth. And they made an effort to get through to me. And I felt bad for how I had shut her down on that. And I should feel bad because it was the wrong thing to do. And so I had to, I went to Sandra Tanner, and I pulled up and went in, and there she was, and I apologized to her. She didn't know who I was or what I was doing there apologizing, but I had all these awful feelings towards her. And she was telling the truth all along. And then I sat down and talked to her. She's the sweetest, kindest person. And I listen to people carefully now. And I didn't detect a lie she ever told. We've been together on many occasions. I've never detected a lie you've ever told. Kara, I just met, but so far so good, But my point is that my BS meter is on. It's on. I'm never going to be duped, at least through what I've been through before, ever again. And the people I'm hanging out with now, the John DeLinns, the Sandra Tanner, RFM, Bill Reel, Jonathan
Sam.
Streeter's brilliant, Sam. This crew, I'm watching for the lies, and I'm not seeing them. I'm really not. And I would say so if I saw it. I'm just not seeing it.
Okay, so treasure digging, Peep Stones.
Yeah. Well, the treasure digging, the Book of Mormon DNA. I'd heard about that.
What about it?
Well, that the Book of Mormon talks about populations of millions of people. And had that been historically true, we would find DNA that goes back to Israel, where Lehi comes from. And there's a bishop out of Australia. I think you've interviewed him.
Simon Southerton.
Yeah, terrific interviews.
Who found what?
Who didn't find any,
Israeli.
Israeli DNA in the folks here in ancient America or in modern America. Their ancestry.
Native Americans trace their genetic lineage back to Asia. Through the Bering Strait.
Right.
By the way, tens of thousands of years, at least 10,000 years prior to the Book of Mormon times, which not only predates the Book of Mormon times, it predates the time that Adam and Eve would have been alive if they had actually existed.
Right.
And so the genetic evidence just kind of destroys the validity of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Period.
And to really come clean about, dumb things I've done in my life. Well, I didn't set out to, but I've been to Mesoamerica and I've been to Aztec, Mayan, and Inca civilizations. In my consulting agreements, to this day, I'm allowed to take my kids with me because I travel a lot and I take a family member with me as I travel. And I'd taken my kids to places, all the pyramids and so forth and Machu Picchu. And I always thought it was all Book of Mormon lands, and I was talking to my kids, my sons, to go on missions because, look at the cement box. And that's where Joseph Smith found the gold plates. So I'm kind of leaning on my kids, on this stuff. Had I slowed down a little bit, done a little bit of research, I wouldn't have made those mistakes. And I made them, and I've had to make a lot of apologies, to my own kids, because I would never have talked my kids into doing something I knew was amiss.
Sure. You want to talk about Book of Abraham real quick?
Well, yeah, that one's real interesting because back in Fullerton, there was a young bishop, and the guy, we were buddies. We used to play tennis together and went parachuting together. This guy was a really fun guy to hang out with. And he was 27 or so, and he became a bishop. And he married a returned missionary. I mean, this guy was gung-ho, really a dynamic couple. And one day, as a bishop, he drops out of the church. And I didn't know what was going on. And I called him and talked to him. He explained this whole Book of Abraham thing to me. And I honestly didn't get what he was talking about. And I think the guy's just a great guy. I still do to this day. But I didn't get it. I don't know why I didn't get it. It's a pretty simple thing that Joseph Smith got these papyrus and purported to translate them into the Book of Abraham.
From Egyptian
papyrus. Yeah. And yet the Rosetta Stone cracked the code, and now we can translate Egyptian, which we couldn't do in the 1800s when Joseph Smith purportedly did this. And now we know that the papyrus had nothing to do with Abraham at any level. And yet there are these apologists that still go on that they do. So there was that. There was the temple ceremony I was told had been lifted or plagiarized from the Masonic temple ceremony. I dismissed that as anti-Mormon lies. There's now a church essay.
Turns out to be true. Yeah.
Well, the church essay, I told Sandra Tanner, you don't need anti-Mormon literature. Just read the church essays. I mean, really.
Yeah.
And then the social issues, the issues with the kids, the issue with the treatment of women. The issues.
What do you mean with kids?
Well, with the worthiness interviews, where some kids luck out and get good bishops. I did, but some kids get bad bishops who are flat out pedophiles. There's no criminal background checks, or who get inappropriate discussions about, necking, petting, masturbation, on and on and on, which should be, if it's a discussion between parents and their kids. And then the treatment of kids, that's called overt abuse or covert abuse. And then the LGBT community. So
that was a shout out to Sam Young and the Protect LDS Children initiative, right?
Sam's brilliant.
Yeah.
Sam, hit the nail on the head, because we haven't even gotten into this, but I did 10, 15 years of research in post-traumatic thriving and wrote a book on the topic. And Sam figured that out way before I did, that unresolved child trauma is the number one plague on humanity today. The reason why there's so much alcohol abuse and drug abuse and incarceration is because kids are being abused covertly or overtly, and they bottle it up inside, and it manifests in all kinds of self-harm or self-medication. And if we can address and hands off the kids and let kids just grow up and be kids, it cures innumerable social ills as a consequence of just doing that.
Yeah. Okay, and you were going to talk about women.
Well, I'm not a woman, but yeah, I do my best to try and see. In business, I notice we come to the best decisions when there's a diverse group, racially, gender-wise, and everything else. I think that's where we get the best decisions coming out of society. And, I can't imagine, I grew up in a church where women weren't even allowed to give prayers in general conference. Or prayers in sacrament meeting. I mean, there's been a little bit of progress, but in terms of leadership roles, the Christian community is ordaining women. The Mormon Church still won't do that.
Yeah. Okay, so that was your rabbit hole that it took you down. Now, what's it like emotionally, psychologically, socially, job-wise, parent-wise, to have given 50, 60 years of your life to the church, to have sacrificed, to paid all that tithing, to have raised your kids in the church? I'm guessing all your kids are still believing at this point that you have your faith crisis. And then you are a professional sort of like critical thinker. And then you say, wow, I missed this. All these other people figured it out way before me. What was the emotional, psychological, parental, culmination of learning that for you, the church wasn't what you thought? What was that like? Was it devastating? Was it awesome? Was it fun? Was it scary?
It was all of the above. I checked D, all of the above on that. I called RFM up, because RFM is, as you know, an attorney, and he went to Texas A&M at Austin, or Texas at whoops, I shouldn't have said A&M. He's going to hit me for that.
UT.
University of Texas at Austin, which is not small potatoes. He's a very bright guy. And so we were kind of in the same boat with, why is it that professionally you're an attorney, I'm a PhD and economist, and we rise through the heights of our careers, but in our personal lives, we're still in the sixth grade. RFM has this sixth grade metaphor, which I absolutely love. And on one hand, my head's swirling around, and you had an interview with Elder Ballard's granddaughter. She said the word untangle in her interview. And I started binge.
That was Laura Andreessen Roper for the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that word untangle really resonated. And that's kind of what I felt like I was doing, because I didn't want to throw out everything related to Mormonism for a lot of reasons, because I learned a lot of good things. But it's excuse me, it's a lot of work to untangle that. It's like separating the cancerous tissue from the healthy tissue. And it's been, like a 5-year progress, because I don't know if you recall, but you asked me to come on Mormon Stories about 5 years ago, and here it is 5 years later, and I'm kind of there. And I feel like I've hustled. I mean, I've been working it. I've been binge listening to Bill Reel and Jonathan Streeter and you, and reading more books than I've ever read in my whole life to try and figure this stuff out.
Yeah. Really, really quickly, in your outline, you mentioned how the Fenders, Jerry Jewell, the Browns, how they played roles in your shelf breaking. I don't think you have maybe touched on that. Do you want to just talk about how some of your non-LDS close friends played a role, or have you already addressed that?
No, I haven't think I've even mentioned, well, I've mentioned the Browns a little bit. Mrs. Brown used to have a saying that I listen to understand, not to judge. So that really hit me between the, eyes in terms of and she was the kind of person everyone loved to be around because she was not judgmental. And I will admit, as a Mormon, I was very judgmental. I was very harsh in my judgments. And so that's something I really learned from Mrs. Brown. And then coincidentally, one of the really nice aspects of when the timing of my faith crisis came is I was smack in the middle of writing a book with Mrs. Phyllis Fender. And Mrs. Fender is, she's sadly passed away, but she was a very devout Christian. But more than that, she was, and Christian's a loaded word, and I get that. I mean, but she was, you will never find a more diverse group of people than in the music industry. And I was kind of her chauffeur. As we wrote the book, we were invited back. She was invited. I was her chauffeur backstage to all kinds of country and rock shows everywhere, all over the place. And she was so, she radiated love in a very genuine way. And it didn't matter if a rock star came up with a tattoo of a tarantula on his face. She loved him. She was wicked funny. She was hilarious. But she was, underneath all of that, she was always kind. She never laughed at anybody else's expense. And it gave me a front row seat into what real Christianity looks like. And she was a profound part of that. And on top of that, Jerry Jewell, I went to high school with Jerry. For those who don't know, she was the first disabled person to ever star in a television network program, The Facts of Life. And then more recently, she was in HBO's Deadwood. And I knew her sister well. And Jerry and I are close. And she's disabled, and she's also gay. She is very open about it. And she's also Christian. And just sitting down for long talks with Jerry was very therapeutic for me, because you could tell I could share anything with Jerry, and she could share anything with me. It doesn't leave, we don't share each other's stories without permission. But between Mrs. Fender, Mrs. Brown, and Jerry Jewell, I felt like I had a really cool support system.
Yeah, I think another part of the conditioning in a high demand religion is just this idea that you can't be happy without being a member of that church. You can't be moral, that you'll just become a reprobate, or, you'll become a bad person. You can't be a good parent. Your family is going to fall apart. Like, just all the fears come at you. And so it sounds like you were able to find some role models that weren't Mormon, that lived exemplary lives. And that can make you a lot less afraid to put down the Mormonism if you know that you can still be a quality person like your friends.
Well, true enough, John. I didn't want, in leaving Mormonism, I didn't want to take a downward move, and I didn't want to take a lateral move. I wanted to take an upward move, and if that makes sense. And these were role models that really helped me kind of navigate, because it's very disoriented, where you're not, you don't know up from down. Your whole worldview is shattered. And I count my lucky stars that and them and others, that I just started identifying people that I really admired in life, the way they had done life. They had done life better than me. And I had a friend who had left the church. I met him at BYU. He had left the church way before me. And I sat down at lunch with him, and his family's doing phenomenally well, beyond words. And so I've really kind of studied those who have been further down the path or never on the path, to try and get some cues about. Because like I say, I didn't want to go off the rails and do something stupid. I wanted to go upward, not sideways or down.
Mm-hmm. So just what I think Karen and I have decided is we want to save part 2 to be about your development of your Christianity.
Sure.
Maybe take a little break. Before we do that, if you can summarize, what were the hardest parts of losing your Mormon faith? And then how did you, just as a way to close, how did you rebound from those really hard parts? Or was it hard? Was it all good? Was it all rainbows and gumdrops and lollipops and jelly beans?
Yeah. Well, it was a mixed bag. Part of it was devastating because I knew I would disappoint some of the members of my family. Not all my family's in the church, some is. It would be devastating for some of my children. And I didn't, that's not something I would ever intentionally want to do.
What about all those friends? I mean, you're a SoCal boy. You like SoCal, Orange County, like all those Mormons in Orange County. What's going to happen if they find out Randy Bell, lost his faith? That's all those young men's leaders, young women's leaders, bishops, stake presidents, friends, colleagues, bishops. They're all going to go, oh my gosh, that golden child.
I don't know if I was ever considered a golden child, but we'll find out. You find out who your real friends are. I had one dear friend of mine say I was in a dark place. How on earth?
Well, you're in your faith crisis now, and
yeah, I'm in my faith crisis, and I tell a close friend of mine, and he says, it sounds like you're in a very dark place. And it's like, that's just an absurd comment, and it's a hurtful comment. This thing hurts. There's great aspects to it too. I love iced tea. I take a walk on the wild side, but, Mrs. Fender turned me on to that. So it's a mixed bag. I find that, it's anything but bleak. It's rough. It's tough. Trauma is, but I wouldn't.
You would describe yourself as a trauma survivor, having been raised Mormon, basically?
Well, it has all the characteristics of trauma.
How so?
Well, because there's the shock. I remember the shock. As I've told you the story, I've relived the shock. That's why I get a little choked up. There was the denial. I can't believe it. There's the anger. And I tell people that ask me, about anger, it's okay to be angry. It's natural to be angry. Just don't hurt yourself. Don't hurt someone else, but be angry. And I was angry. And sometimes you revisit the anger. There's the stage of depression. Fortunately, with me, it lasted a couple months, which is normal for depression. But those are all classic signatures of trauma.
Those sound like the stages of grief.
Well, that's exactly what they are. Yeah. And they're also the first 5 chapters of the book I wrote.
So what pushes it to qualify for trauma versus just things that are sad that you have to grieve? It seems like trauma takes it to the next level beyond just the loss of a loved one or, something you'd have to grieve. Because I actually agree with you. I believe that to be raised in a high demand religion and to leave it automatically qualify as a PTSD diagnosis in most cases, if not all. That's been my experience. I'm curious how you sort of feel like leaving a high demand religion pushes you into that PTSD category by default.
John, that's a right on question. The guy who came up with the term PTSD, I happened to be on the platform at a speaking event, and he spoke after me, and I became friends with him. And he and the academic literature described trauma as something that lingers longer than a normal upset. So you break up with a girl in high school. Well, 2 weeks later, you're dating someone else and in love with someone else. That's not trauma. At least to me, it wasn't trauma. But trauma, I've been going through this for 5 years. That, according to the academic literature, is trauma. It's kind of a duration lingering on. There's no question that this, at least for me, has been traumatic. Some people walk away with it, and my hat's off to them. But
almost no one. For most people, it's a multi-year epic journey. For some, multiple decades. They're still they're still grieving and still trying to process it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say 5 years is almost unheard of to have processed leaving a high demand religion.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this all happened to me in my late 50s. And I thought to myself, I don't have time to let this linger on for decades. I've been going at it very aggressively, as aggressively as I know how. And I'm glad I have, because I feel like I've processed it, as fast as I can. And the kids are on track, so yeah, 5 years, and that's going at it aggressively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And just as we kind of wrap up this part, next part 2 is going to be Randy's, this has been Randy's descent, kind of leaving Mormonism, enjoying Mormonism, thriving in Mormonism, discovering it wasn't true and leaving it. That's going to be part 1. Part 2 is going to be your ascent from your perspective into Christianity. That'll be part 2 that we'll do later today after a break. And then tomorrow will be your discussion with Alan Mount, sort of theism versus atheism, a respectful bridge-building dialogue. As we end part 1, and there's going to be people that are just like learning about all this stuff for the first time, your episode will be the first time they learned about the Book of Abraham or Peep Stones or the, golden plates or polyandry or whatever.
Yeah.
Or maybe they knew about all that stuff, but are right in the thick of the trauma of a faith crisis. Mm-hmm. Do you have some final parting words of wisdom or of hope that you would want to give somebody right in the thick of the faith crisis?
Well, I totally get it, because I lived it. I mean, it's one thing for me to try and empathize with, someone who's LGBT, because I'm not gay, but I am LGBT affirming. I support people that are. And so for someone who hasn't been through it, we can do our best to empathize and support. And that's the right thing to do. That's all you can do. But for those who are going through it, my heart goes out to you. I've lived it. It's tough. There's times where you just break down. It's so tough. It sucks. There's no way to mask that. In fact, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. That will just prolong the trauma. You got to get out and talk about it, at least to someone. I'm talking about it publicly, but I've been talking about it privately for years, because that's all I was comfortable doing. But
who did you lean on to talk to?
Well, I leaned a lot on Sam Young. Sam is a brilliant guy, as you know.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant.
He really is certifiably brilliant.
Yeah.
And Jonathan's, I binge watched all you guys. Jonathan Streeter is,
he has a YouTube channel called Thoughts on Things and Stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
He's terrific. Bill Reel and RFM.
It sounds like these guys are your personal friends, not just you enjoyed their podcast.
Well, all of the above. I listen to their podcasts. I call them the next day and we talk about them. You're all the apex thinkers in this space, and I have respect for those who have advanced knowledge in things, because you can catch you can get the concepts you need to get to process the trauma, if you will. I love hanging out with all you guys, and I want to get more into Gina Colvin is awesome. Because
she has a podcast called A Thoughtful Faith.
Yeah.
That we'll link to in the show notes.
And that's been a big part of my, reconciliation with Christianity. And Sandra Tanner I met with a few times. I'm sure she doesn't probably remember me from Adam, because a lot of people visit her. But and then I mentioned some other folks whose names I probably shouldn't use. There's been a whole kind of team that I have looked to, and there is I'm happier than can be. I'm thrilled with where I've landed, but I don't want to say I've landed, because who knows where I'll be a year from now. It's more of a journey now. It's instead of thinking that I've got it all figured out.
So you're saying if you're going through a Mormon faith crisis, become close friends with Bill Reel, RFM, Sandra Tanner, John DeLynn, Sam Young, Lindsay Hansen Park, and Gina Colvin, and they'll help you through. Is that what you're saying?
Did you mention Natasha? No, really. Seriously, you want to find some friends you can talk to. And I've been very fortunate, because it's crazy, because I have a case up near where RFM lives. So I'm flying up there all the time. I have a case in Houston. So I see Sam. I've just been very fortunate, and I'm happy to share what I've learned to the extent that others are willing to allow me to share. But I have been very fortunate.
So it sounds like what you're saying is feel your feelings, embrace your emotions, be angry, be sad, embrace the stages of grief, find good friends that you can talk to, learn from the people who have been through this before you. That's the advice I've heard so far.
Well, that and become curious. Look at science. I am very fascinated with science now. I never had that fascination before. I'm very fascinated with atheism, not in a negative way. We didn't even go through this, but when I was a true believing Mormon, I had lunch with Penn and Teller once.
We'll cover that in the next episode.
We'll cover that.
Okay.
But I'm saying get out there and talk to people. I learned meditation when I went to India and learned about Buddhism. I learned about Islam over in where these guys saved my bacon in a combat zone. So I'm just saying
those things are helpful. How in your Mormon journey, in your deconstruction phase?
What I am more than Mormon or Christian is I'm always looking for common ground. I'm not looking at a me versus them. I'm true, you're not true. I don't believe that God came and told anybody all churches are wrong, all their creeds are an abomination, and all their pastors or all their professors are corrupt.
And here's the one true way.
That's an absolutist mindset. I don't have that anymore. I think everybody, every atheist, every agnostic, every Buddhist, every theist, every deist, every ambivalent, every Hindu, Muslim, Christian, I learn something from. That's where I am. And so get out there and talk to people instead of being judgmental and divisive and argumentative and judgmental. Get in there and talk to people and look where we have common ground and play nice. Always play nice, realizing that even when I go into the prisons, which I'd like to talk more about, those inmates teach me profound wisdom. I'm not there to teach them. They teach me. So everybody has something of value. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. And if somebody just says things are really dark and I don't know if I can make it, you would say to them,
go slow, or even back up, take a break, do what you're comfortable with doing. Don't have an agenda that you have to force through or a schedule. Just slow it down, take it easy.
And the best resources for a Mormon faith crisis, if you had to just list them off, are what?
Well,
for you, what were most helpful for you? Resources, books, websites, whatever.
Well, I loved reading the books by scientists. I'm a reader. So from all these areas, my game plan was to catch up on all these things I should have been learning all along. Evolution, the Rift Valley, learning about evolution. Instead of being judgmental, I called up my old Christian friends and said, hey, we're always having these debates. I'm willing to sit down and actually listen to what you say without being a jerk and trying to get into a fight. And the same thing with my atheist friends. My best man's an atheist now. So I sit down, I listen and listen to understand, just like Mrs. Brown taught me, rather than to listen to judge. Get out there, be curious. Everyone has something of value.
But the Mormon-specific resources tied to Mormon faith crisis, any particular resources you want to call out that were helpful for your Mormon faith crisis?
Well, honestly, I'm not just saying this because I happen to be sitting here. Your podcast was, if I'm going to pick number one, Mormon Stories. What's so funny about your podcast, John, I got to tell you, I get a chuckle out of this. I'd heard your podcast back when you were kind of a true believer of sorts. And I thought, well, maybe John DeLynn has answers. And then I kept listening, but it helped me kind of process all this stuff. So I'm a big fan of Mormon Stories. What can I say?
Okay. Any others that were helpful along the way?
They're all great.
List them.
Okay. Sure. Mormon Stories, Jonathan Streeter.
Thoughts on Things and Stuff.
Thoughts on Things and Stuff. Bill Reel. Mormonism Live.
Kara? Mormon Discussion.
Mormon Discussions.
Mormonism Live with RFM.
RadioFreeMormon.org.
Okay.
Gee whiz. Sam Young's kind of he's kind of refocused on his business right now, but he'll be back.
Protect LDS Children.
Yeah. Protect every child.
Utah Lighthouse Ministry, Sandra
Yeah,
Tanner.
Sandra Tanner. If I had one suggestion for Mormon Stories, is more cowbell and more Sandra Tanner.
Yeah.
I think she's just a treasure.
What about CES letter from CES director?
Yeah, I got that. I read that. Really well done. Jeremy Reynolds, Gina Colvin,
Thoughtful Faith.
Natasha Huffer Parker.
That's Mormon Mental Health and Mormon
Yeah.
Sex Info for Natasha.
Gee, I'm going to leave someone out.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, that's the main stuff.
Yeah, it's all great, and it all comes from different dimensions and different angles.
Yeah.
And when you triangulate all this information, you can start kind of reconstructing something that sounds right and leave behind what you find problematic.
All right. All right, Randy. Well, we've gone about 3 hours. It's time for a little lunch break.
Okay.
And Kara, it is always so great to have you here as well. Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us, Kara.
I
Any
enjoyed
final
this.
thoughts for this episode with Randy?
No, I also loved a lot of those people you just mentioned as well. Really helped me. My faith crisis was only 2 years ago, so a lot of those same resources.
That's kind of
super
interesting
helpful.
because 2 years, and it's probably because you're younger. Yeah, I guess you're more resilient, I'm guessing.
That I bounce back really quick.
Yeah.
I'm the type of person where I make up my mind and then I just kind of go forward with it. I don't spend a lot of time like hem and hawing and being really dramatic about it. So I had a good cry for a little while and my whole life fell apart. And then
Yeah.
about 2 months later, I was like, all right, I'm good. I moved forward. And then I didn't think a whole lot about it until I downloaded TikTok. And then I thought about it more and I realized I could help
Yeah.
people with it. But yeah, it wasn't something that was like a long, slow burn of an ache
Yeah.
when I discovered a lot of these problems with the church history or whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm happy for you because, I think the longer you're in, the more your neurology becomes kind of programmed that way. You know, there's a young man I met at Thrive. I sat at the table with some really cool young people. So, and this one guy, his name is Jack. He says,
Is this the 2021?
the one that just happened.
Okay, 2021
Yeah, it was a
Thrive.
spectacular event. If you missed
Great
it,
host.
she
killed it.
She killed it. She was hilarious. Everything. And Jack was saying, he was, I'm guessing 20s, early 30s maybe. And he said his whole life was programmed. You grow up 12 deacon, 14 teacher, 16 priests, mission at 18, BYU, marriage. And he says now I can either go on that track or any other ways. Life's kind of gone from black and white checklist to full color. So there is another side of this that's really quite vibrant and really cool. I love it.
So you're saying for you, the metaphor of going from a life of black and white to a life of full spectrum color is how you would describe where you've ended up in your transition, even though there were some dark times.
Dark times, but I wouldn't go back in a second. And I'm
You
now
would take
having
the blue pill and go back?
I wouldn't do that.
You're a red pill guy.
I really wouldn't do that because a lot of my friends, as you figure out, Southern California, lots of clients and this and that. Most people, the vast majority of people in my world are not Mormon. But now I can have real conversations with them. And I have one particular friend who's Jewish. He's a client. He's also Jewish. We have lunch all the time as friends. And now I can really sit and listen to him and get something out of it rather than, how do I maneuver this conversation to give him a Book of Mormon, that kind of thing. Those days are over. This guy has profound wisdom that I've been ignoring for all these years. We're connecting at a whole higher level. It's super cool.
So for you, leaving Orthodox Mormonism or leaving Mormonism has allowed you to open up your mind and heart to learning from other people and having deeper, more meaningful emotional connections with friends and associates.
Far, far more. And I'm not saying I'm there. I'm not where I want to be. I don't want to sound like that. But yes, I'm now communicating with all kinds of diverse people at a whole better, higher level.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Randy, dear friend, it's been great to have you so far for the first 3 hours of Mormon Stories podcast. Thanks for sharing us your Mormon story. Now what we're going to do is just come right back for part 2 after a short break. And we're going to hear your Christian story about when everything came unraveled, how you ended up exploring atheism, exploring agnosticism, exploring secularism, and exploring Buddhism and Islam and other things, and how you started studying Christianity and ended up self-identifying as a Christian and what Christianity means to you. That's all ahead on part 2 of our interview with Randy Bell and Dr. Randy Bell. And if that's not enough, we're going to come back tomorrow for part 3, where we talk about atheism and theism with the Alan Mount of Marriage on a Tightrope. Really quick, name some of the books that you've written, because you are a well-published author and you've got a bunch of cool books.
Oh, well, thanks, John. I wrote a textbook I don't recommend. It's 500 pages called Real Estate Damages. It's in its 3rd edition. It's why I have all these cases. It's a technical book. But I wrote a book called Me, We, Do, Be. I was on
We, Do,
Be.
Okay.
And the 4 Cornerstones of Success. I was on the Today Show with that and all kinds of media. That was a fun book. And then the book I'm out with the media promoting now is Post-Traumatic Thriving.
You did one, you helped write the biography of Leo Fender.
Oh, yeah,
right?
sorry. Yeah, I wrote the book. I finished the book with Mrs. Fender. The title is Leo Fender. And if you're into music, leofender.com is the website. But that's about the story of Leo Fender. And I've got a museum exhibit we're putting together that's going to be going into a museum soon. And then the book I'm doing now is Post-Traumatic Thriving. And that's doing pretty well, but I got hit really hard with COVID in the last year. And so that's a little been messed up the schedule. But it's had great reviews and great media interviews, and that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right.
And it never mentions the word Mormon.
And are you talking about your next book or not yet?
Maybe we can talk me into it over lunch. We'll see.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, Randy, thanks for your generosity supporting. Well, thanks for your friendship.
Yeah.
Thanks for your support of Mormon Stories and the Open Stories Foundation. And thanks for your generosity here sharing your story. And I think Kara would join me in saying we're really grateful.
I am really grateful. It's been a lot of good parallels, really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'm going to just say I've chipped in a couple bucks to Mormon Stories, and I think, I'd kid around with you, John. I've saved $50,000 in therapy from listening to your podcast. I think we all need to support this.
And maybe a little tithing.
Yeah. I really do. I think if we're benefiting and there's an enormous benefit to your platform, certainly I have chip in a few bucks. Yeah.
All right. You can do that at mormonstories.org. You can become a monthly donor. Click on the donate button. $10 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, whatever you can afford. Mm-hmm. It's what keeps us going. And we lose donors every month. Less than 1 out of 1,000 of our listeners are actually donors. So if you can't afford to donate, don't feel a second's worth of guilt. We give it away for free to help people no matter what. If you're in a position to help us financially, it pays for Kara, it pays for Jen, it pays for Jennifer, it pays for Gerardo, it pays for Brooklyn, it pays for this amazing staff and all the equipment and resources. Yeah. So please, thanks for that call out, Randy, and thanks to everyone for this.
I think we all need to step it up with support. Financial, this stuff, it's an impressive thing you put together, and I can't say enough. And 1 out of 1,000, give me a break. Come on, people. $5 a month. Well, let's do it.
We got to pay Kara more too, right, Kara?
Yeah, I got a wardrobe budget.
Yeah, make it $6.50 a month. Cup of coffee.
All right, everyone, don't go away. Come right back, whether you're listening just in audio or whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you enjoy Mormon Stories podcast. Come right back for part 2, where we're going to talk about Christianity after Mormonism with Dr. Randy Bell, part 2. And then tomorrow we'll have part 3 with Alan Mount, theism versus atheism.
And I didn't mention Alan Mount because I know he's coming here tomorrow. Is he bringing Katie?
I don't think so.
Ah, darn it.
She's
I like her more.
She is better.
She's wonderful.
All right. Thanks again, Kara. You're awesome.
Yeah.
So great to have you.
Thanks, Kara.
Thanks, Randy. It's been really good.
All right. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you guys again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com for any feedback. Take care, everybody.